Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of The Storytellers. Tonight, my special guest is my old pal, Kelley Jones, and we're going to be talking about the two things that matter most in this world, comics and monsters. So let's bring Kelley on in and get this party started. Hey, buddy, how are you?
Doing great. How are you doing, Graham?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. See what I wore for you?
Very cool.
It's the Aurora Monster box covers.
Man, that was life in those days. That was life.
I have a five and dime shop here in the village that I live in, and they sell models, and they also sell the tester's glue. So whenever I go in there, I always look around. I open up, take a little sniff.
Same thing. I used to order those from the back of the old magazines, the old monster magazines, and there was a hobby shop near us. Sadly didn't survive the whole situation here, and they had the Aurora monster kits. Still, they would still sell them. I guess they still made them.
Yeah, I think Polar Lights or one of the other guys got the
rights to it.
Yeah,
and the one I was always looking for was in the back of Creepy or Eerie or one of those. They sold a thing called a UFO, but it was a rocket ship and had a little rocket in it. And I bought that, and I love that thing. I was so excited to get it, and I bought the Allosaurus, and they had an Allosaurus and a Pteranodon, and all the Frankenstein, Wolfman. I always love the weird ones, like the Prisoner. The guy, I love that stuff. The girl who menaced.
The Allosaurus, you know what I do with my Allosaurus? I had a train set up in my basement. And so I had like a little train station in the village and all that kind of stuff. And I put my Allosaurus right in the center of it.
No,
would go around.
I always wonder about my poor late father who, when I had all those things and well beyond the age we should do this, I took those things, the Allosaurus and all the other dinosaurs they made, and we had a really big backyard, and I made it like a jungle. I was trying to do King Kong type of thing. And I put those all out there and try to make it like that. And, you know, he was a very blue collar man. And I wonder to this day, what did he think he was raising? You know, that I was totally, there's this kid and I'm out there doing this and I'm trying to make it because I've loved King Kong as a kid. I still do. Yeah. And here I was trying to make it so I could draw pictures of it and stuff. It was just, you can't recapture that, you know? Yeah. I should go out and do it now.
We had a lot across the street from us that was open and it was overgrown and stuff. And my brother and I, he had the King Kong model. I had the Godzilla model. And then we both had these little cameras and we would pose the monsters in the sand and stuff with some of the overgrowth. So it looked like trees, you know, compared to their size. And then we take pictures from above, you know, it looked like the monsters. We still have some of those old Polaroid shots somewhere.
I mean, you remember when you see these things, you so totally buy it. And with this whole King Kong Godzilla movie, obviously I'm a Godzilla guy, so I love King Kong, but Godzilla wins, right? That's it.
That's it.
And I remember even being as a kid when King Kong first time I saw it, outraged that he beat the Tyrannosaurus. I remember just being outraged. At best, it's a draw. I still kind of skip through that scene, you know. No.
Well, let's talk a little bit about storytelling. You know what today is?
What is today? Today
is, I believe it's the 5th year anniversary of the passing of one of the great storytellers, Herb Trimpe.
Yes. I had the great good fortune, I think a lot of us do, when we're lucky enough to do this, we get a front row seat to all of our heroes, right? Get that free pass to go and see them. And whereas they might get, you know, you always think, because I never am, but I always tend to think these guys must get tired of answering the same questions over and over and over. But I had the really good distinction. Carl Kiesel took me to have dinner with him in Seattle years ago. And I had the great good fortune of sitting next to him. And I had to say, look, you're the first guy that I spent my own money to buy the comic books of. And I didn't even, you know, it's one of those things where it was Hulk 155 where he fights the Shaper of Worlds, and it's in the microverse, right? And the Shaper of Worlds has him fight Captain Axis. So it's like a different reality where the Nazis win and they're running New York, and Captain Axis is the guy, and the Hulk has to fight him.
Okay.
The other one was, I believe, Marvel Spotlight #5 with the Ant-Man fighting Egghead. And Egghead had this tricked out Winnebago. And the cover's great because he's in a Coke can, and then Hawk is attacking Ant-Man. And so to my young, naive vision, I thought, well, these are the first 2 comics I bought, unrelated. They were both Herb Trimpe, and they're both about being shrunk down. So I thought, well, comics are about being shrunk down. You know, that was the Marvel universe is all shrunk down. But I dug those comics. I still have them. They're in my honor. And I told him how much I loved those books. And God bless him, he remembered every bit of it. And yes, totally remembered all of it. And I said, I read those things on the 2 or 3 hours it took to get home. I read those as many times as you can in the backseat of a station wagon, thinking it was the finest money I had ever spent. It was perfect comics. It was, well, it's why we do it, why we love it, you know?
You know, one of the great things about Herb was that he was such a consummate storyteller that he immersed you into those stories.
Yeah.
And he used cinematic techniques. You mentioned, like, the first Hulk that I ever bought was this one right here.
Yeah.
And I still remember the sequence where Bruce Banner is in this rocket ship, and he gets, you know, nicked by a missile, surface to air missile, and he starts panicking as he's trying to control this thing, and eventually one of the missiles hits it and blows it up, and you see him falling. And he had these diagonal panels, and in each panel, Banner kept getting closer and closer. But he started getting bigger and greener as he got closer. And then there's the shot of him from that diagonal panel that follows the same trajectory as his body, smashes into the earth. And then you turn the page, and out from the rubble comes the Hulk.
Yeah.
That was so awesome. I was like, oh my God, he survived a fall from outer space.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of comics, to me, has always been that eccentricity that it can bring. Movies can't do it as much as CGIs they can't do it. No. No one can do it. And as much as someone will say, oh, you should see this Netflix thing or this movie, and they're fine. Mm-hmm. Nothing beats what you just said. Nothing beats that. When you sit down with these things, you get rid of the rest of the world, mm-hmm. and you sit down, and you're immersed in it. Like I said, that Marvel Spotlight 5, what got me was, we would go from our world, and then Herb could do the Ant-Man in this world where he's tiny and everything's big. And I completely bought it. He runs into a Coke can to get away from this Hawk. Was as thrilling a thing as I had ever read, seen, or it was amazing. And then to think that, that this guy did that the same month he drew this issue of the Hulk. And he had complete command of his skills. Mm-hmm. Don't see that anymore.
Yeah, he was great. He passed way too early. That's for sure.
Way too early. Broken heart.
Yeah, he was a runner and everything, you know. And,
yeah.
But you know,
we get what we get, right? You know. Yeah. And he spent it well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you never know when it's your time to punch that clock. So you have to live every day.
Look, for us, these books are our legacy, and here we are talking about him. You know,
right? Well, that's immortality, right?
It is. And so when something like this happens, as sad as it is, I always think, well, man, when Bernie died, it's devastating. Mm-hmm. Len died, it was devastating. I was working with both of them, but I have these books, and it's like they're right there again. They're right with me. All of those feelings and emotion, everything's right there with you. And that's the power that I just, maybe that's where it really comes down to, because the so-called geek culture has taken over. It really hasn't. It's that the rest of the world kind of gets into it, but it's not the same. And
No.
I don't mean that in an exclusionary way. It's the comics, and it's you don't even have to be a professional. I do this professionally, but I'm a fanboy. I get back into these. I tend to not want to look at comics. I'll lose a day once I start getting into it. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
One leads to another, and then where the geek culture hasn't taken over is I want to talk about this with all the people who say they love the Avengers and whatever. And as soon as I start talking about comics, they're out. Because they're real world people, they don't get it. And I'm going on and on and on about not just the minutia of it, because I don't want to be a professor of comics. I want to be a lover of comics. And I just know, I don't care how these guys made these things. It touched me. I don't care if they did it to pay the rent. I don't care if it's, whatever was going on in their mind. Their work was stunning. And Herb, well, he's one of the greats. He's just one of the greats and should be lauded as such.
He's underappreciated. That's for sure.
Very much so. Until you get into our way of thinking. And not once people get into comics, and especially of this time, I will say once you start reading Herb's stuff, it becomes definitive. It just becomes so powerful, so well done. When he was working with Marie Severin, it didn't get any better.
Yeah. John Severin.
Well, she colored him. So So
but John inking him was, oh my God, unbelievable.
It was. And that was just one of many books they were putting out. And a testament to Herb was when Barry Smith decided to come back to comics. That's who he got to lay out the books to get him back into it again.
Interesting.
He's the one he went after to get his storytelling chops back. He's the one he said he went back to get his imagination back. He thought they were genius, and he needed 3 of those before he felt he could do one on his own. And Herb, of everybody else, he picked Herb.
Yeah. That's so. When you were a kid, and you first discovered comics, what was that first comic for you that lit your fire, that lit your light, that you said, you know what, this stuff's magical?
To me, before a physical copy, it was the Marvel 66 cartoon show.
Okay.
That's where I first saw it on television coming home from school. I didn't see it when it first came out, obviously, but they would run it. There was one of those UHF stations that couldn't afford anything. And they did a thing where they just did it. It was a show called Solid Gold Heroes. So they would run a Flash Gordon episode. They would run, what else did they run? They ran Rocket Robin Hood, which was Ray Bashki show from Canada. And then Marvel 66 cartoons of, Captain America, Thor, and all that. So I became aware of Jack Kirby and Don Heck and Steve Ditko and Gene Colan and all these guys through those comics or through those TV shows, which was their artwork just kind of moved around.
Yeah, right.
And I was transfixed by it because for whatever reason, I loved it. They weren't moving. It wasn't like other cartoons, but it had a power, and the stories were terrific because they were just simply adapting what had already come out.
Right.
And then my brother came home. He was in the 6th grade, I believe, 7th grade. And I'm 4 years younger. So he came home with a stack of comic books that the teacher would have for them if they finished their work early, the teacher would let them read comics to pass the time and not disrupt anyone. And for whatever reason, my brother brought them home because I like to draw. And he says, oh, you might like these. I had no idea people drew them. And the first one out of the gate that knocked me out was Fantastic Four 83, with the Fantastic Four fighting Maximus of the Inhumans. And the title got me. It was called Shall Man Survive? and I was off to it's Kirby, right?
Yeah.
And when Maximus is going to fight the Fantastic Four, I had no idea who anyone was, right? I had no idea. Kirby's power of his art was so strong that I was instantly into it. And I remember Maximus stands there and his arms are out and all of his minions are putting his armor on. And I wondered, will man survive? So, you know, they had me.
Stan hooked you.
Yeah, you got me. And at that point, I said, you got to get, it was like drugs. Where'd you get these? Can I get more of these? And by a weird coincidence, my father then had a very good friend who just said, do you want to take a weekend at my cabin up in North Lake Tahoe, which was as isolated, probably still is, but it's really isolated. No, one television station type of place, way up in the mountains. And he didn't want his kid, his son, my dad's friend's son, he didn't want him to have the mind rot of these comic books that they had. So he just gave them to my dad so I would have something to do because there's nothing to do up there. And it was wonderful. It was the Avengers and Superman and Batman. And it was just everything. Everything was in it. And I was so, there was a whole subculture I didn't know existed. And that's really what it was, Graham.
Yeah.
Was wonderful thing, a secret society of people. Because then I would meet a kid and you'd kind of feel each other. I like comics. Now am I going to be ostracized? No. And then he would too. And he'd have like Power Man and Iron Fist, which I didn't even know existed. And I would read that and go, this is amazing, you know?
Yeah.
So it was the little pebble of shall man survive to, I mean, within that short period of time. And then my brother got a driver's license and I literally made him drive me to all the 7-Elevens in the area. And when he finally got tired of it, I would go, okay, I'm going to rat you out on this time you came in after curfew. I'm going to rat you out. I was terrible kid brother, just terrible kid brother, because I had to have it. I mean, I had to have it. And my brothers, you know, after a while he began to get it and he says, you know, let's just go do that. Let's just go get you your comics, you know. You don't have to extort me anymore. Because he could see how much I love this. Mm-hmm. And he was really into music, so he could understand, you know, his collecting LPs and whatnot. He could get it. He could see me, you know. And I have never lost that. I've never lost that.
Now, which came first for you? Your love of comics or your love of monsters?
Monsters came first.
Yep.
Monsters Monsters I had access to. They were on television.
Right.
And I was, again, lucky that I had a father who allowed his young sons to watch monsters. Mm-hmm. And I remember him waking me up once to watch them.
Nice.
And the rule was no crybabies. Once you see it, you go to your room, and if you have a nightmare, you stay in there, because if your mother finds out, I'm dead. So we just, you know, I probably think that's what, whatever good things or bad things happen out of you, that was a good thing. You know, as a kid, that was a good thing.
First monster movie you remember watching?
The very first one was that I remember, because I was fascinated with monsters. So I vaguely remember The Outer Limits, and it was so terrifying. Just the music scared me. But my dad loved it, and it was on some repeat thing on UHF. But the first one was the classic of classics in Frankenstein. Oh. And I saw it. They played it and The Bride of Frankenstein on a local station. Didn't have a host or anything. It was just called Black Museum Theater. And they just ran it without any explanation. It was just on. And I remember seeing Frankenstein, so scared me. Just unbelievable terror. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't stop watching it. Yeah. And it was that thing where you get behind the couch and peek. Probably, Graham, because so much of it is silent.
Yeah, there's no soundtrack.
It's cinema. It's just cinema happening. The next one obviously was Bride, and I went from terrified of him to feeling sorry for him in the same evening. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And at that moment, monsters had a depth. I remember my father running out of the room, not in fear after Bride of Frankenstein, but to tell him that Frankenstein wasn't such a bad guy.
He's a misunderstood monster.
That's it. And I didn't know, I didn't have any of the psychology of this stuff. I just knew I felt really bad for him. At the all he wanted was a girlfriend, which is all they all want, right? The black creature of the Black Lagoon just wanted a girlfriend.
And what happens when he gets one? She spurns him.
You gotta pull the lever.
Yeah. Don't pull the lever.
Why you would have a self-destruct switch in your, I don't know. You do. And I need one in my house. I always think I need that lever that I can threaten to pull if anything goes wrong.
That's why I just think to myself, now the architect is looking around with his plans. Now, where the hell am I going to put that lever?
Hey, you know what? Because you do, you need it, you know?
That's right.
No, it was an apocryphal evening to remember that on a Friday night and tell my work-weary father with bated breath. And I never, you know, it isn't like I spoke to him about it, but I carried that on to when I was a dad, and my kids would go through that and tell me something like it. And you have to smile that it passes on. But as I got older, my father would tell me about, you know, his absolute favorite of all of these was the 1951 Thing from Another World. My dad,
the greatest movie ever made.
Right. And he had served in the military. He says, those guys are real. Those guys, if you had no monster, those guys, that's what I remember were those guys. Yeah. And that way of thinking and that kidding back and forth, even with the superior officer, that give and take.
The professionalism.
Yes.
Whenever you see any of the like that Godzilla Kong turd that they just released, we have this girl on a aircraft carrier telling an aircraft carrier captain what to do, as if that's ever going to happen.
That's your lever again. That's the lever.
I believe an architect put a lever in that thing before I believe that she can talk to that captain.
Well, you know, okay, we all went there to see the fight. That's what we went there to see, the fight scenes, to see the whole thing. I will give them their due on that. But see, to me, I still think when I feel a powerful moment in one of these films, I still go back to, and I think I told you this before, to Ghidorah the three-headed monster, when they're not going to help the little larval thing. Rodan and Godzilla aren't going to help. They could care less. Let Ghidorah destroy the world. What have men ever done for us? And at that point, that when the little larval Mothra goes down to by herself fight, knowing she's going to die, but she's going to resist this thing. And it shames Godzilla and Rodan. I know this is juvenile sounding, but it worked. I still get chills when all of a sudden you see Godzilla come out of nowhere and just take on Ghidorah, and the larval thing gets on the back of Rodan and they start doing their thing. And I'm like going, yeah, that's it right there. That's how you do a monster fight. And no one kills anything or whatever. Ghidorah just says enough and flies off into space, and he's at it.
There's too much take you monsters.
Yeah. But that movie still works on me. Like incredibly powerful.
I just watched Son of Godzilla the other morning. It was on HBO. Yeah. Now, not one of the finest in the original Godzilla canon. However, I found the people more believable in that dopey movie than I did in this new one.
Yeah, and I think it's because, and there is a reason. I think that when you see the original Godzilla films, everyone from the special effects and the direct down to the person bringing sandwiches are sincere in the making of this film.
Right.
In the films, they're deeply sincere about them. They take them, it's like they're doing Shakespeare, and they care about what they're doing. And that comes through. There's none of this winking at the camera. There's none of this. There's no
self-awareness.
No. And I think what they miss is, certainly you can have a child in a Godzilla film. It works, but the way they do it now is wrong. They don't get how to do it the way that connection is. And the Japanese sensibilities are so strong in those old Godzilla monster movies. Rodan is a heartbreaking film at the end.
Yeah.
The one can't live without the other.
Right. And it just it climbs to commit suicide in the volcano.
Can't do it. Can't live without it. The fact when you see Mothra do everything she can to protect her egg from a rampaging Godzilla, it's heartbreaking. It's wonderful. I think a lot of people want to make fun of these films, and I would say they haven't seen them yet. You know, they'll see a clip or something. They haven't seen them yet. I love the Peanuts. To this day, I love the Peanuts. And the little two little twin girls who
yeah, the
fairy girls. And
the fairies,
I love them. And you buy into it because they could translate what they were necessary. They translate what the monsters were saying. They could speak monster, which was terrific. And then you get, you know, the side ones, like the greatest to me beyond that were War of the Gargantuas and Frankenstein Conquers the World.
Right.
As good as it gets. And I would say War of the Gargantuas, it's in my top 50 films of all time. So
yeah. Did you get to see that at the theaters? My brother and I got to see it at the theaters as a double bill with Godzilla's Revenge.
Yes, I saw. Well, I was lucky. I got to see Forbidden Planet on the big screen with This Island Earth because they had a child's matinee when I was growing up, and it was on Saturdays, and it was a way for parents to dump their kids off. You know, what a different time. They just dump you off, and you were there all day.
Yeah.
And I saw Invaders from Mars on the big screen. First time I saw these movies was on a big screen. That's and, amazing. You know, all the kids with the popcorn and all the mayhem going on.
Yeah.
And
you weren't throwing popcorn. You were sitting there, quiet.
Yeah, I was that kid. I couldn't
I don't blame you.
I could not wait to go. I think seeing Forbidden Planet on the big screen is a revelation. You know, I don't think until really 2001 did you get something that took it seriously as that did.
The budget for that movie is all on the screen too.
Yes. Well, that
movie though for me is it's a bit slow, and that zither music or background sound that they used instead of a soundtrack, I find a bit annoying.
Well, I think what was interesting is with the soundtrack was it was argued even then that it wasn't a soundtrack.
Yeah.
Right. They did not allow the union didn't allow that to be considered a soundtrack or be nominated. But as with Kubrick's 2001, both reinvented music or sound for a film. That one, these electronic tonalities, they call it.
Right.
In Kubrick, he took classical music and removed the dun 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 dun. You know, neither of them have that. I always took the tonalities, as they call it, as the sounds of Morbius's mind.
Yeah.
It was a way to do this weird thing that was going on that Morbius didn't even understand. But that, beside the point, they felt alien. They felt unique, like we were in the far future, or we were in an unknowable future or something. It was different. It was different. And I think that casts a spell. It's a charming thing to realize that those things still work after all these years. Whereas a lot of movies that are straight A-lister don't. They're of their time. And you look at them as a sociological point of view. Oh, this is what people looked at then. But you can understand the really weird triangle of Forbidden Planet of father, boyfriend, daughter. You know?
Yeah.
That's really right there. And he won't acknowledge it.
Right.
But that thing that eats everybody does acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Wonderful. That, I mean, I don't even think they were looking for that, you know?
Well, they say it was Taming of the Shrew.
Yeah.
No,
it was, I think it was, The Tempest.
Was it The Tempest?
Yeah, The Tempest. The sorcerer or the king king goes to that island, learns sorcery, and he's with his daughter, and then those people wash up there, and it starts the whole ball rolling. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. With a little Oedipus thrown in.
You gotta have. Well, there you go. I mean that. I remember reading the novelization, and they go far more into it.
Oh, really?
Yes, they go far more into it, and it really upsets Morbius. But they explain things. For example, the when you see the animals there on tigers and stuff, and they throw in there, yes, the Krell had come and brought some back. No, they never did. That wasn't it. The original screenplay, which the novelization takes from, was they're from Morbius's first creating things. And he's making these things what he knows. But the problem is he didn't know anatomy or anything. So when they kill one, it's just a jumble of tissue. There's no Dr. Ostro can't find any organs. And that's what leads him to think that something's really weird here. Well, Morbius is keeping him alive, as he says, microsecond to microsecond. He doesn't know it, though.
Oh, see, now that's a much better movie.
Yeah. Yes.
That's a much better movie. Instead of vaporizing the tiger, it would have been so much cooler to blow it open and then
that's what happens. And Dr. Ostro figures out the weird Oedipus thing, which Morbius would be horrified by.
Right.
He would have been horrified by that. So what? But when the doctor figures that out, then at that point he's telling Captain Adams, tone it down, because something's going on here and it's causing problems. The novel starts out brilliantly, and it's the way the movie was supposed to start out. It was supposed to start out 100 years after the fact of what we're going to see.
Right.
And the only and on Earth, the reason they're even talking about it is the light from the explosion of Altair 4 blowing up is now finally reaching the Earth.
Right. Yeah.
And the only reason they know it's true is Robbie is still there. Right? Robbie's on Earth and he's doing stuff, and they figure 10,000 years in advance of their technology. And if Robbie wanted to, he could destroy the Earth.
They talk about that on the special features on the Blu-ray about that, and that would have been, again, so much cooler to add. It would have added another layer to
I'm just glad they even made the thing, because there was a lot of dubiousness, and why are we putting $1 million into a science fiction movie when we could make a musical? It's MGM, and MGM, to their credit, did that and 2001, which are groundbreakers. They're still used.
What year was that? 55?
56 was Forbidden Planet, and then obviously 68. And I saw 2001. My dad took the whole family to go see that. He didn't know what it was on my 6th birthday. No one knew what was going on, but it started my love of classical music. I didn't know I would like it, but it's so powerful, in that film. I remembered the monkeys because I love Planet of the Apes. And I love the spaceships because I'd never seen anything like that. And I love the Stargate sequence because you didn't have to be an adult to just be overwhelmed by that. So it was just power of images, which is what we do, right? It's the power of these images. Even if you're an ignorant little child, the power of that stuck with me, to where you're seduced by that. You want to know, how did they do this? What minds come up with this stuff? I want to be in there when they do it. That's what happens, even though I was a little kid. So, that's the first thing I bought, was a cassette of the, soundtrack to 2001, not realizing it was just classical music, but it had that neat little rocket ship on it. The neat little rocket ship and going into the big spaceship. I love that stuff.
Where they're jogging up in a complete circle. I was at a convention in Houston, and NASA had because NASA has the the complex in Houston, they had an area set up at the convention with like suits and moon rocks and stuff that you could all look at and touch, and it was so cool. So I'm talking to one of the astronauts, you know, and I mentioned to him, we talked about that 2001, you know, where he goes, "That's bullshit." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He says, I said, "Doesn't the centrifugal force, you know, isn't that what the whole process is? That it would force that artificial gravity would force that that body onto the surface as it's rotating in a circle." He says, "As soon as you lift your foot up and don't have contact, you'd be floating away."
Yeah,
because there's no magnetic field.
Yeah, it's so wonderful. When you see stuff like that, though, the amount of thinking that went into those things, I don't know. It's I guess what it is I can love that at the same time I love the green slime, you know, which I mean, I love the green slime, you know.
How about that for a theme song, huh?
Oh man, I can watch a double feature of those two. They came out at the same time, you know. So I can watch those all the time. I think what it is it's the power of those imaginations at work, just taking you places, you know. And that's the science fiction element of it. The horror element of it is, it's seeing those things you shouldn't see, but you got to see them. Black Sunday by Mario Bava about put me into a coma as a kid, you know, but I had to see it, and I was in love with Barbara Steele. So, but I had to watch every frame of it, and it was the same thing. And then when you get older and you say, how did they do it? And again, it's to your thing of budgets. Guy had $12, but you would never know it. You know, you're working in absolute poverty. So he's using all the tricks he had to trick you, and they work.
Well, limitations force creativity.
I think
the best stuff comes out of limitations.
Yeah, and I think Martin Scorsese said several years ago, and I agreed with him, but it'll never happen. He says, every filmmaker should be forced to have a $5 million budget, and that's all you get, and you got to figure it out no matter what it is, and that will force the creativity. Or David Lynch saying, you need just a digital camera, and that's it. You go out and make a movie. Now you have digital. There's no excuse. You don't need a huge crew, and go learn to solve your own problems. Tell your own story, solve your own problems, and then you know how to, you know, the rest of it, a technician will tell you how to do it. But ignorance is a great power in that you just want it to be a certain way. And I think in that regard, that's true. It forces that you do your own work, do your own answers. I had nothing when I started to draw. I just loved to draw. There was nowhere to go to learn. Right. There was, in fact, that was ludicrous to even ask to learn to draw a comic book or comic book characters. And it's not just that you're in a society that doesn't get it. You go through an educational system that would ridicule illustrative art or comic book art as not real art. And I used to have that battle constantly. Once to where I was kicked out of a high school art class. I mean, literally kicked out because I wouldn't buy into that notion. Not for behaving badly, not for doing the work, but that. You couldn't imagine that now. I never had a problem with it. It gave me a free period to draw what I wanted to.
I had more detentions in junior high and high school for drawing like the Enterprise on my desk.
You and me.
I had to come after school all the time scrubbing it. You know,
me too. It was worth it because they were so damn boring, those classes, that you had to do something. I used to, if I was in a math class and utterly befuddled, I would just draw pictures on the back of the test. I gave up. I realized I wasn't going to make it. You know, I jumped out of the plane, Graham, and the parachute was just not there. So I might as well enjoy myself until I smack the ground.
Well, I'm sure you've never had that life-saving opportunity to have to use the Pythagorean theorem, you know?
Yeah, no. I realized it just wasn't in the cards for me. And, you know, once my dad gave me the free pass of, well, as long as your citizenship's grades are good, meaning you're not acting up in the class you're failing, I'm okay with it. You just sit and be quiet and let the other kids get a good job and make a lot of money one day. You just be quiet and maybe they'll let you mow their lawn.
You said your dad was a blue-collar guy. What did he do?
He was a cement contractor.
Okay.
So he used to build houses. He went from, when I was a kid, he went from just being working for someone to running his own business. And he became successful at it. But I remember, you know, it was a hard life. And to get me to understand, he would take me out during summer vacations, and I would have to do 2 months out there with him when he had his own business. And it was hot and horrible and miserable, but he did it so I would understand getting an education. Mm-hmm. It wasn't to teach me how to build a house. It wasn't to teach me how to pour cement. I could do that. I mean, I just by osmosis, I was there. I could figure it out. But, and then he'd give me August. August was my vacation month. And at the same time, though, he's saying, I don't care if you draw all the time. I don't care if you love comic books. Let's watch monster movies. He was that, you know, let's go to the drive-ins. It's just, there's a real world out there. Understand it. And that's been the most valuable thing, because I appreciate every minute of what I do because I can remember that.
Right. My dad was a homicide detective, and he was college educated. And he didn't understand, you know, art as far as like what I wanted to do. He wasn't, you know, he read the newspaper comics that he understood, but comic books, it just didn't register in his world, you know? So he says to me, when he finds out I want to be a comic book artist, why don't you learn a trade? You know, if you don't want to go to college, learn a trade, become a plumber, or electrician, or something like that. And I said, no, I want to be, you know, I want to draw comics. He says, look, you've got 2 cousins with master's degrees from Pratt Institute, and one of them is laying brick and the other's delivering pizza. What do you want to be an artist for? That's what he said. Now, my mom was a teacher and very artistic. And so she kind of got it, you know, she understood, you know, that where my passions were, but my dad didn't get it until many years later when I started doing newspaper strips. And the strip appeared in his newspaper. And he called me up one day, and this is how I knew. It was Rex Morgan, and we were doing a story about black mold, and there was a smell in the basement in the story. And my phone rings, and I pick it up and go, hello, because I didn't have caller ID back then. And it's my dad on the other end, and he just says, I know what the smell is. I'm like, oh, okay, Dad, what is it? He goes, there's a stiff in the basement.
Good Lord, what he must have saw and comes home to you wanting to be a comic book artist.
Oh,
That's a weird day, man.
Yeah.
No, look, my dad took far more pleasure out of my career than I ever did.
That's great.
He loved it. He loved every second of it. He loved telling his brothers, my uncles, his circle, that I wasn't doing any of those things. When I first got hired, I was I think about 19 years old when I got hired, and I was living at home, and I came home from, I had to go somewhere, and I was gone a day or two. I came back, he had re-outfitted my room to be like an artist studio, put track lighting in, redid the floor, the whole thing. He was so taken with it, and it was so different to him. And he told me once he was in a hardware store, and of all things, somebody had mentioned how I did Batman. It was a Red Rain or one of those things. And he's like, that's my kid. He couldn't say it, but that was, and that he came home and told me that, like I said, far more into it than me.
Right.
And any of the trappings of it, my dad was fascinated by it, because it was probably a vindication of his follow your dreams kind of thing. I think my dad, if he could have, he would have stayed in he was in the Navy and had advanced pretty far, but you know, you have a wife and kids, you got to take care of them, and it just didn't do the numbers he needed. And so he went back to what he knew. But if he could have stayed, he would have. You know,
was he a CB? Is that why he was in the construction?
No. He had done so well in the schools there. He was to go work. In fact, he had worked at a nuclear facility for the Navy in, of all places, Tennessee. And he was in programs that when the big war happened, he would be clearing the way and rebuilding infrastructure. That's what he was. I mean, it wasn't ships. That came later, that he got to go and be an engineer on a ship.
Oh, okay.
But he initially had qualified after 6 weeks of boot camp to serve on the Enterprise. But at the very last second, they said, okay, rather than the first guy, we're going to take the second guy. The first guy's going to go and go to this base. And it was, you know, one of those total secret type things. He didn't talk about it. They were told you can't talk about it. He didn't talk about it. And it was only until very late in life that my brother had actually researched a lot, because they had decommissioned the place. And then he would say, yeah, this part here or that part. He would tell us little stories of just life, that, you know, going from Northern California to 1950s, the South was a shock to him.
Yeah.
As an 18 or 19-year-old man. So he would tell those stories, or how good it smelled, the curing of tobacco. And the curing of hams. He said he just loved it. He says it made you want to smoke and eat ham all day. But that's what their job was. He says a lot of it was underground. Yeah. All he said. Probably why he liked those old science fiction movies of giant insects and stuff, you know, because who knows. But that was his world. And when it came time, they came to him and said, they offered him a gig at the Pentagon. And it just wasn't going to pay enough to raise a family then.
Well,
it is weird. I mean, where all these things go, it's weird.
Yeah. You know, God laughs at our plans, you know.
Yes, he does. And I always used to kind of smile, because he would get such a kick out of doing he would always ask me about it. So tell me what's going on. Tell me something. And I would go, really? You want to talk about that? Do you understand? You know, I was the embarrassed one, you know? No, he wanted to know every little detail of it, you know?
That's funny. That's fantastic. I didn't have that with my dad. You know, like I said, he wasn't like that.
Your dad had a seriously serious job. My dad, you have to wait for the nuclear war to happen for him to I mean, your dad, God knows what he saw or dealt with all the time. You know, the sociopaths of society he had to deal with, you know.
Well, you know, he had that great Irish humor too. He could tell a story, and you know, when he could sit you down and tell you a story, and you'd be like just enthralled. And I think that's where I got my love of storytelling from. Was because we used to share movies too. Because he got me into John Wayne and the westerns and war pictures and stuff like that. And we would sit and watch World at War or Victory at Sea, those documentaries at the time about World War II. And that was stuff that we shared.
Yeah, my father
just had that great Blarney.
World at War, the BBC one. He made us watch that. But no, I think what happens is, to your point, my dad would let me watch Kolchak the Night Stalker and The Outer Limits and The Night Gallery. None of the other kids got to. None of the kids on my street, none of the kids I went to school with. So to the storytelling point, I was the one who would tell them what they missed. And I got so good at it, I was giving them nightmares to where I was being told not to tell them these, you know, the Night Strangler or any of that kind. I wasn't allowed to tell them. I did it anyway. I kind of did the same thing. You can't be a crybaby if I tell you. And they all had to hear it. And so I had the power of being the storyteller just in reciting these things, you know? You know, it isn't until years later that I found, wow, that's a powerful thing. You know,
when you're working on stories from an artistic standpoint, what is your least favorite part of the process? And what's your favorite part of the process?
My favorite part of the process is the idea. Is when that aha comes to your mind. The idea sparks the emotion. And so I can't wait to do it. When I get the layout there, and when I get that idea on paper and I'm happy with it, then I'm bored. Then I have to get it done as quickly as I can to get on to the next thing. So I'm always excited by the idea. And I mean, I think it's funny, the storytellers thing, because you can do this and I can't do it. I'm a storyteller, but I am a idea guy. And so I always figure that it's why I'm always entranced. It's why back in our time, I used to love getting from DC your black and whites, the make readies. Remember? So we don't know what everyone else was doing.
Right.
And that was the most education I got on storytelling as far as comics went, is I'd look at what you were doing. And I used to call them and say, why am I here? Because this, I don't even need to see it lettered. I know what's happening. This is how it should be. I used to try to talk them out of me because I said, God, I'm looking at this and this makes total sense. And
that's very kind.
Well, it was the truth because I still have all those. And but for me, it was always the ideas and the things I was fascinated with. I only realized until like 15 years after I'm doing it, like they're the total wrong objectives for comics. Ambiguity is not what you go for. Some discordant panels are written. That's not what you do. And but I so believed in the power of these images. I didn't mind taking 5 pages to get to that moment. I didn't mind, and I was using all cinema stuff. I didn't have the comic book knack, wherewithal, history. I just read them and loved them, and that was it. So I didn't know Alex Toth, and I didn't know all these guys. I didn't know them as that aspect of it. I just knew I reacted very strongly to their stuff. So I would think of that image, and I would read a script, and I go, okay, there's 7 moments here. I'll just, I've got to set myself up for those reveals within the book. I used to always tell Doug, I tell any writer, but Doug is the one I used to say, he'd say, well, what do you want to do? And I said, all I know what I want to do is for you to come up with 5 or 6 great moments in whatever issue I'm drawing. And then you stitch them together however you want. But that's what I want. And then later on, I was reading a book on Stanley Kubrick, who will not say what his movies mean, but he said almost identically. They asked him, how do you make a movie? How do you do it? And he says, well, I find a story I fall in love with, but really what I do is I think of 6 or 7 great scenes. And then however I get to them, that's the work of the picture, but the scenes are in my head. And he says, if I can get that and create and have that emotion and that power, that's all it is. So it was, maybe that's just, it's like, not that I came up with anything, but I was following that. And cinema was my thing. I learned by taking film courses how to tell stories as best as I could. I remember having one professor teach William Friedkin's work, and that helped me a great deal. Obviously I loved Orson Welles and I loved John Ford. I love John Ford. But I started in the genre, I started loving Terrence Fisher from Hammer, who could hold an image and hold it and hold it and hold it, and then bang, get you with it. And then explode on you. And I loved that. I think his Dracula pictures, when he's directing those, do that. His Frankenstein pictures do that. And again, getting back to it, a guy who made those things with deep sincerity. That's why they hold up now better than most stuff, because they're done completely sincere. No jokes, no sarcasm, no making fun of it, no winking at the audience. Vampires exist. This crazed doctor did make something live and had the great vision of making him the monster, not the monster. You buy that. I do know Frankenstein because you can meet a psycho, so that kind of stuff I wanted to put into my work was those moments, which are not the objectives of comics. It's not the objective that it happens. So as artists, we always tend to look at what we can't do. And I've been mystified by my career for as long as I was able to become aware of that, because that surrealism that I worked in, or that symbolism I worked in, are antithetical to comics, yet I have such a blue-collar approach to comics. You got to get 22 pages in a month and a cover done in a month. You have to get a page done a day. You have to discard the crap and keep to the goal. You have to learn your tools. You have to translate a script, all the hard stuff. So I don't go into modes of alienation and look into the middle distance. I'm very, very hardcore. You work and get it done.
So you don't get analysis paralysis. You get it done, and you know there's another panel to follow it. So if that one's not perfect, you move on to the next one.
Marvel Comics had a great lesson for me, Ralph Macchio, and I don't know if they did it for everyone. I just know he sent, and it's got to be somewhere in my stacks and stuff. He just sent me this mimeograph thing, and it said, one panel per page has to be great. The rest are just get it done. If you can, and you have to get one page done a day. If you can do that, that's 22 great panels in a book. And if you can do that, you're going to have a career like Jack Kirby. If you can do that. That sounds easy. It isn't. If you think about it, that is hard to do. Because sometimes you're going to get pages that there's just, there's not a lot on there to do something with. So it taught me, that's where the film thing came in. I started different angles, work with lighting a lot. Right. Marvel wasn't crazy about me using a lot of lighting then. A lot of heavy darks and stuff. So they would tend to have the inkers remove a lot of my shading. And
really, that's weird.
Oh yeah. Well, not early on with the Micronauts, but as my career progressed. And when I came to DC, I was under contract at Marvel, but they were, they stereotyped me not as a horror guy, but as a guy who could handle licensed projects, as a guy who would handle these things. And I had some ability to do it, which I didn't. And I remember, I sat there one day, Graham, and I thought, man, I've got this good career going. The checks are coming in. And I was as unhappy as I have ever been. There was no happiness in this. And I wasn't thinking of the future. I was thinking in terms of probably the way you should. I was thinking, I don't want to do this the rest of my life. I'd rather be building a house than this, because then at least I'll have my time back. They're taking something I love and they're turning it into this. I don't blame Marvel. It's how they did it. And then they were just changing all the what joys I did have. They would just remove that in the inking. So I asked to ink myself. I thought that would help. And they said no, even though I started as an inker. They said no, because you'll take too much time. Okay, and I understood that. So I'm under contract. I don't know what to do. DC gets a hold of me, not knowing I was under contract or anything, through Sam Keith. Sam Keith is an old friend of mine, and he went over there. And we had been talking, and I had mentioned this to him. He says, well, why don't you just come over here? I know some people. Maybe you could just see what they have for you. And I did a few little things, and nothing, all under him. So it wouldn't come back that I was in trouble for breaking the contract. And then one day they called and said, hey, we have Dead Man. Would you be interested in doing it? Not because I do horror, not because they even thought that. They just said, we got to keep our copyright on this character. Dan Jurgens didn't want to do it. Do you want to do this? And I said, yes. And I knew as soon as I said yes, what that was going to cause. Marvel, what that would cause.
Because you were your contract was still good?
Yeah. Okay. I had a long way to go on it. And I was so unhappy. And I'd asked for my freedom numerous times to try to do something. I took it. I figured I'll just pay the price then. And if Marvel, sends executioners, I've earned it, but at least I'll go out doing something.
Right.
And so I took the gig, and a friend of mine who worked in a comic book store said, you do know, because he knew this was going on. He says, you do know they're going to promote this at DC, and someone at Marvel's going to see that your name's attached to something for them. And I hadn't thought of that in my stupidity, but it was my joy of, I was breaking out of prison in my head. And the excitement of it and the joy of it was so there. And yeah, that worried me. But that worry would go away when I would finish a page that I was absolutely in love with. And they were at DC going, all the things I was telling you that was wrong with my stuff as far as comic book sensibility goes, they didn't care. They were reacting to these images. And they were saying, this is great. And the best day I had at that point was they started rattling off all these different artists coming in and making Xeroxes of these Deadman pencils.
That's cool.
Yes. And how I got to meet John Beatty was inking John Byrne, Mike Golden, Mike Zeck, everybody. And he gets a hold out of me. I never had spoken to him before. He was an A-list as it gets as far as an inker goes. And he called me. He says, I don't know you at all, but I was walking through and I heard these people talking. And I walked in there. And if you ever want to do something, I want to ink you. And that was like Terry Austin saying, or Klaus Janson saying it, or whoever.
Yeah, right, sure.
And I hung up the phone and I said, I don't give a shit what Marvel thinks now. I trust myself. Now, that's not, I knew I couldn't say all this stuff to Marvel when that day came. I would just say, well, okay, I'm guilty, but I'm going to go. If I burn every bridge, I could give a shit, because for 6 years I toiled, did everything I was told to do. And every time I asked, nothing ever happened.
Right.
So they send me a script and I just keep working on Deadman. Marvel sends me a script, but I just keep working on Deadman. It was something god awful. It probably was fine, but in comparison to what I was doing, it was god awful. And I don't do it. I just keep working on Deadman. I go, I know I'm really screwing this up for him. I should just call him and do it. But I'd always find an excuse not to that day. And so time goes on, and now I know there's something wrong because no one's getting a hold of me. And I know this, one day I get a call from the editor, Don Daly. And I get a call from him saying, Kelley, I got some really bad news. And I'm like, oh, they found out. Right? Maybe not even through promotion, but they're all friends with each other back there.
Sure.
Hey, Don, that guy, he's great. I got it. Or you should see this. And that's what had happened. And it wasn't, and I'm going, oh, here it comes. And he says, we're going to have to cancel that book you're on. Wherever you're at, just stop. And I'm going, so it goes to, hey, wait a minute. You're breaking the contract now. Yeah, I'm not breaking it. You're breaking it.
I've got 25 pages done.
I just go, what do you mean? And then and in the contract, it said if they do something like that, that they had to pay out, not just what you're doing, but what was expected to be done. So that was like 4 books or something like that, because you in those days, remember, we used to work 3 or 4 months in advance. So you were blocked out of there was no work for you until they could find some, okay. So I said, but you guys said I would, here I am. And probably like the old sitcoms, now you try to tap dance like you were a good soldier when you weren't. So I say this, and Don says, don't worry. I went there knowing this would be a problem, and I have them cut you a check for 5 issues of this book. Yeah, wherever we're just going to pay you. I said, okay, so now I get this big check, and I have this job from DC where they did pay in advance, but I didn't want to show them what I was doing because I didn't tell them I was changing Deadman so much. I didn't tell them. They had seen a little bit, but they didn't know. Yeah. So I went.
Who was your editor on that?
At DC?
Yeah.
It was Barbara Kiesel, who just did these little action books.
Okay.
But it was Rich Bruning, Karen Berger's husband, who is handling the big fancy Deadman. that John Totleben was to do. Dan Jurgens was to do the little thing, but John Totleben was to do this, and he at the last second, due to health reasons, just couldn't do it.
Okay.
So they gave it to me, and I decided I'm going to do what I do. And now that Marvel had given me this windfall that I didn't expect, I didn't have to turn in any work to get paid. I could just sit on it and just keep churning it. And I knew that they would eventually call me saying, where the hell is something? Are you only doing like 5 pages? It's been months. And that's normally what they would get, right? If they pay it in advance in those days, guys would just go on a vacation and never do their work.
Yeah.
So I made a point that every week I would have a set amount done. If a page took me longer because I was being a fancy artsy boy, fine. I'd make up for it on the weekend and get those other storytelling pages done. It lent itself to my sensibilities because it was a ghost story. So I could mess around with alternate points of view. Where I screwed up, I could say, where I got something wrong, I could say, oh, I'm being, artsy guy here. Whatever. They would buy it. They didn't criticize me as if I was doing a straight Batman story. So months go by, and I just am realizing there is a God, because he got me out of the mess with Marvel. Marvel got me into a position to play this game with DC where they didn't see anything for a long time. And I could really codify that style and my philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw it, Graham, as this is the end of my career, because they're not going to like this. It isn't Neil Adams. It isn't Jose Garcia Lopez. It's this weird guy. And fair enough, they can get rid of me. But when I'm done and I'm out there building houses, I can hold up this odd and say, this is what I was about. This is what I thought. And that was that. That was my attitude. So finally, Rich gets a hold of me, and he says, Kelley, in those days, remember, editors called you? And Kelley, it's been 3 or 4 months. How are you doing? I said, I'm doing great, Rich. I wouldn't talk about it. I'm doing great. How are you? Well, I'm doing fine. How are you? And I went, doing great. Is there something I can do for you? He said, yeah, turn in some art. I haven't seen anything. Well, he was busy with the rest of the world. Dead Man was a keep the copyright book. He had important stuff he was doing with real characters and real creators. And this was the copyright book. And who cares? So I said, all right, give me a week or two. I got to make some stats, backup stats. So in case something bad happens, I have it. And he goes, okay, fair enough. Because, in those days we didn't own our own copiers, and we didn't scan or anything. You had to go to a copy place and back yourself up all the time. So I went and did that. And that week turned into another month. And then he called irritated. You said you were going to do this. Well, by that time I had for a 48-page book, I had about 40 pages done. 45. It was close to the end. I knew they couldn't say no at that time. Or if they did, they were going to have to eat a huge thing. So I took it, I put it all in a big box. I sent it off to him. And I get a call when they got it back, the assistant editor, Casey Carlson. And he just said, I don't know how they're going to react, but this is one of the best things I have ever seen. But he's the assistant, right? Yeah. Because I cannot believe how good this is. And I'm like, oh, okay. Rich calls me the day after that. So I'm thinking, well, you know how we are. Freelancers were paranoid at that point.
Oh, yeah.
KC's getting fired for liking it as they're getting ready to get another guy and replace me. I've already gotten to that point. And all Rich did was this. He didn't call, but I got a Federal Express, this thing. And it said Rich Bruning, DC Comics on it, this little letter. And it came and it said, all it said is, Kelley, ooh, Rich. And that was it. And he, that's all he said was, ooh. The next thing I hear was a couple days later, he called and he says, I would have called you. I didn't have time. There's all this stuff going on, but I haven't been able to get this out of my mind. This is really tremendous. keep doing it. Just keep doing it. The only notes he had were these minor little things, and he added a thing that you always want an editor to do if you want to do it. If you don't, that's okay. So I figured that was a very kind thing to say. There were like 5 notes. I gave him 2 of the 5. Right. And went back to what I was doing. And it was a year they gave me to do 2 48-page books that you ink yourself. So that's 100, that's 200 work days technically, right? As they see it, and the covers. And then I added end pieces. I really doctored it up. And it went from this little thing that was in the back room that nobody cared about to being one of their big hits of that year. And because it was done that way, and because no one knew who I was, I've always likened it not maybe to the scale, clearly not to the scale of. It's almost like when Barry Smith first came to Marvel and he drew the way he did, and then he went away for a year or so, and then he came back and he was the Barry Smith. I always think he was the Barry Smith. It's just he was told, draw this certain way.
Right.
And so you don't change that much. He always was that guy, but he was told, this is how you get a job. And that's what happened to me. It wasn't I got better. It's just I finally got to do what I thought and ink myself. And that combination was new to them. And I transcended my influences. I had a film sensibility, so they hadn't seen this before. Mike Barron was the writer, and Barron was, they just stayed out of Barron's way. So when Barron gave his signet ring approval, it was good. They actually promoted it. Something I was told wasn't going to happen. And all of a sudden they promoted it. It sold out. I remember Terry Cunningham called me. I didn't even know who she was. And she goes, we're going to reprint this. And in those days, it was a big deal to reprint something. They didn't really reprint. So I had made it to that point where I had crossed all of these very weird barriers, these impediments, and it all worked out. But each and every one of those individually, if they had not happened, it wouldn't have happened. It opened the door to Batman. I remember Archie Goodwin called me up and said, would you do a piece of Batman, which they used for a detective that you were doing later on. I just remember drawing it and turned it in. And then it was just an inventory thing. It wasn't even for a cover. It's just do a pinup is what I think he said.
That's the one where he's jumping off the cover or jumping off the building?
Jumping with all the bats, and it was a red cover.
Yeah. It's a Bullet for Bullock.
Yes. And I didn't draw that cover in fact, I think I did it well before. It was late 80s when I did that. And I did that, and Archie got it back to me. He says, this is really nice. I like this a lot. I'm going to use it for something. Would you be interested in doing something for me? And at that time I was doing Sandman, and Sandman was a tough book because the scripts came in very late and there was not a lot of time to do them. And whereas that book was just starting to take off, and I did get the best of the stories they did. I got the best. The Seasons of Mist was the one. And that I got to work with Neil in a, like we all do, collaborative way. I didn't know he didn't do that. It's one of those things where you just say, okay, what are we going to do? This, I didn't know I was breaking all the rules dealing with Neil. I just go, yeah, how about this? I remember telling him, I got it. You just look back on things, you go, what a naive guy I was. I just would, and I remember telling him he had this scene where Sandman had a girlfriend 10,000 years ago and it doesn't go right, and he sends her to hell, or what we all would do. And he sends her to hell, and the story was he'll go to hell and take her out of hell. And I was fine with all that. But then Neil says, yeah, and then, gives her a big kiss. She's really happy to be out of hell, and it's this wonderful moment. We see romance and whatever. And I said, no way. I'm 10 minutes late for my wife at the supermarket, and I'm gonna, you can't do that. 10,000 years in hell? No. Have you been with a woman? Have you been in a relationship at all? And Neil thought of it. He says, no, you're right. You're right. Let me rework that. And he actually came out really well. But that's how I worked with him. It's just the stories were getting later and later because he got more committed to other things. Right. And every month I didn't know what was going to happen next as far as when it would come and we were getting a lot of different inkers. That's when one of the inkers was Malcolm Jones, who was working with Doug. And then Doug had seen Dead Man and a Swamp Thing and a few other things and said, okay, he had this Elseworld thing where Red Rain. And he called me about that. And I was so overwhelmed that it was like, this is the guy who wrote Moon Knight and Master of Kung Fu, Godzilla. I loved all this stuff. And I was very starstruck. And then he tells me the idea and I vomited. I hated it. and I was just like, I hate this idea. I just hate it. I can't say no because it's him. So but I don't say that. He goes, and he's kind of just saying, well, Batman and Dracula, it sounds stupid. And, Batman and Dracula do this. And I'm going, oh God, no. And he says, but I've written a treatment. And why don't I send it to you? You tell me what you think. And that bought me time. I figured, okay, treatment. How many pages? Seasons of Mist. It was several issues or whatever. It was on one sheet of paper. I get this thing, and it's like this thick of this story. And now I know he's put a lot of effort into it. It was something that it just didn't float out of his head. And he chose me, and I got it. And here's a guy who's like been this hero of mine. I'm thinking of the stuff he did with Galassi, the stuff he did at Warren with Galassi, Blood and Black Lace, just masterpieces. So I read about the first few pages of this thing, and I'm absolutely knocked out. It wasn't at all what I thought, and I couldn't see this. So I put it down. I call him up. I'm 3 or 4 pages reading it. I tell him that I don't know where it's going. I will take it just based on this, because if I don't know where it's going, that's a good sign. And I'm into it this much. This is terrific. And at that moment, I had to call Karen Berger and say, because they'd offered me Sandman as a monthly, and I said, I can't do that. And everyone thought I was nuts for that. But it's like, it's Batman. The Yankees, it's the whoever, you got to go play on that. They were asking me to play shortstop. And so I said, okay, I got to do this. And I called him up and I told him that. And a similar thing happened where they said, okay, here's the script. You got like a year to do it. It was only 90 pages, but it was something that Doug had given me a lot of latitude on how Batman would look, once he became a vampire. He says, that's up to you. So the wings and the cape and the fangs and all that stuff, all of that weird stuff, he just allowed to have happen.
Got a super chat here from Heel vs. Babyface saying, Graham, I have mad love for you, dude. Kelley, your art astounded me. Batman, Red Rain, and your Batman run was incredible.
Well, that's
Thank
very
you. Appreciate the super chat.
Thank you very much. That's nice.
Yeah.
No, so those things it leads to that thing. And that's the blue collar part, because I'd left they didn't have the term then, that Vertigo stable for the mainstream stable, but I brought the mainstream sensibilities to the Vertigo way of books, Dead Man and Sandman and Swamp Thing. I bring that very blue collar thing. And then when I came to the mainstream, I'd bring this Vertigo thing. I was in both worlds, not really knowing it. I probably not to any level, but like Gene Colan. Gene Colan was the artist that the horror guys all said, wow, he's a superhero guy. And the superhero guys go, wow, he's a horror guy. Because I used to think, God, he can do Daredevil, and Tomb of Dracula. and they're
Iron
brilliant.
Man.
Iron Man.
Completely different.
Submariner. I mean,
Yeah.
he could do whatever was that. And then his romance books.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a deep, dark secret, is the romance books. You get Buscema, you get Colin, you get the cream. Yes, the cream of Marvel's crop is there, and you can see they're really digging this.
Oh yeah.
So I kind of fell into that where I'd bring these weird things, and so when Denny hired me to do Batman as a regular book, I was probably as shocked as anyone that call would come. Because when I was doing all the Nightfall covers, I wasn't involved in any of that stuff. And it was because they had hired Sam Keith, and Sam froze. For whatever reason, he froze. And he couldn't do it. And I had recommended him because they said, do you know someone? Blah, blah. And I said, Sam is great. Hire him. He just done Wolverine. You know, if that's what you want to do some covers, that's a great guy. And then Sam froze. And he would come over to my house, and for whatever reason, he just froze. And I don't know why. Because he's done I mean, that's what he can do a great one. And so DC called and said, hey, your boy flamed out on us. You owe us some covers because we gotta get these things out. And I had, the week they called me, that one I had to do that day and get it out to them. They called very early in the morning, and I had to get it out to FedEx. You remember you were back east, so you had 2 more extra hours, I think. Where I was, 3 o'clock, it had to be on the truck. So I just knocked one out, and then I had to do the next one the next day and 2 more after that. So within 5 days, I drew 4 covers and got them out. And I thought that was the end of it. And then I went back to what I was doing. And I apologized and you know, but for whatever reason, it just kept going. And they said, do you want to do a couple more? Or it wasn't, do you want to do a couple more? Here's these other ones you have to do. But they didn't know what was in the stories. You know, Chuck's writing his, Doug's writing his, Alan's writing his. They're all in the planning stage. They're working 3 or 4 months in advance. They're trying to coordinate all these books. So they would say, well, we think he's in a sewer. We think he's in a sewer in this one. We think this is happening in that one. This might be this. So I had to do kind of those, you know,
evergreen covers.
Yeah, you know, the kind of generic but Batman-ish. I was thinking of, you know, well, you know, Neil Adams used to do that for him in the 70s, so I kind of remembered that where would do something along those lines. So I just did that, and but at the same time, I was working on my own stuff for them. I was doing, I think, another Dead Man book. I believe I was doing the second Dead Man book. So, and an Aliens. So I was working for Dark Horse at that time, and it just sort of snowballed. So when Denny called, I was totally shocked. Doug Minch was very upset with me for taking it because he wanted to keep doing special project type stuff and whatnot. But I had, when Alien had come out, I had went down for Dark Horse to San Diego to help promote it. They said, come down and we're going to do a thing for Alien. And I said, fine. And I got to, when I was there, they said, hey, someone wants to meet you. And it was Doug Wildey, who, you know, Johnny Quest and all that stuff. And,
Rio.
Yes, Rio.
I love his stuff.
I do too. And so I said, okay. And Doug and his wife said, would you like to go have a cup of coffee? And I go, okay. I have no idea where this is going. And so Doug Wildey had, and this is a few years before Denny called. And so Doug Wildey took me and we went and had a cup of coffee. And he says, young man, I have no idea what this story's about, but I really like the art. I really like what you're doing here. And
what story was it?
It was Alien Hive. It was a 4-issue miniseries.
Okay.
And I said, and I called him Mr. Wildey, but he's Mr. Wildey, you know? And I said, how did you, I said, for myself, how did you even, why did you even look at this? And he says, well, I came down here for Rio, and it was in this bag of stuff Dark Horse put out, and there was these issues. And he says, I kind of flipped through the other stuff, but this really captured me. And he said this amazing thing. A couple amazing things, because it influenced me to take Batman. And one of the first thing he said is, I feel like what I'm seeing from you is like the stuff, the period I came from and all that, you learn the lessons of it. All the storytelling, the lighting, all these things. It's why he didn't understand it, because it was such an odd story, but he liked what he was looking at. And he said, there's a lot of drama in this. There's a lot of power and a lot of drama in this. And then he asked me, how long did it take you to do this? And I told him whatever. And he said, okay. And I had said, well, I'm trying to get good. You know, I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm trying to get good. There's a lot of stuff. And I'm trying, and I have all these silly ways to try to figure it out. One of the things I had told him was looking at the make-readies for the Batman stuff. And I'd said, I just see what I can't do, and it's bothering me. And he says, well, you know how you do it is, he says, you take a monthly book, if they offer or ask for one, and you do it. And you don't judge yourself on the first issue you do or the second issue you do. You judge yourself on the 11th and the 12th issue you do. And you'll learn to draw, because you won't have a choice. And you can't repeat your images. You have to come up with something new. You have to keep your deadlines. You have to, it was all hard work stuff. And it went into my head. He's right. Because he said, anyone can take 6 months to draw something. It should be good. But a month, that's the men from the boys.
Yeah.
And he made a great comment too. And this is from him. He says, there's illustrators and there's comic book artists, and comic book artists are the ones with the imagination. And I went, right. That's where it's at. That's where you focus your mind. That's where you get your training. And that's what I wanted to be, because I was perceived then as the artsy fartsy guy. And Dead Man and Sandman, and fine and dandy. I did a Grimjack that went over very well, because it was kind of bizarre. And I was getting that reputation. I didn't mind it, but I knew that's not who I was. But I couldn't be the guy I wanted to be. The guys I wanted to be, I couldn't be a John Byrne I couldn't be those guys. It wasn't in me. But I thought the best chance I had was, okay, I'll remember that. So when Denny called about 2 years later, I remembered what Doug Wildey had said. And I just said, knee-jerk, yes. Yes. Like I said, Doug was upset, but I told him, just consider this a chance to write the stories you want to write. I'm going to do this because there's this other agenda I have. He said, you know, and so he did. Went from there. And Denny, as we know, he was the end of it as far as what you could do with Batman, whether it's a studio, anything. The other people at the company. I think Carlin was Superman. He with Batman. Yeah,
Denny was the gatekeeper.
Yes,
of all Batman.
And when he asked me, I said, okay, yes, but you know, I come with a lot of baggage, just how I am. And he says, I'm not calling you because of, you know, as that is a detriment. That's the reason I'm calling you, is I like that stuff. I like whatever it is. I like it. The only thing I'm going to ask you is, you said yes pretty quick. Can you keep the deadline? Because you've only done this much for us in this, you know, in this period. I'm looking at it, and that's a long time to just do what you did. And I said, well, Denny, I inked everything you saw, so double that. And I did a 4-issue miniseries at Marvel with Venom. And I said, so if you add it all up, that's actually 12 issues and a half in a calendar year. I'm not Jack Kirby, but it's a lot of work. And he says, you're working for Marvel? And I said, yeah, because it's Venom. And it was a fun story. And yeah, I have no problem with it. And I'm not under exclusive with you. And he goes, fair enough. He says, okay, you're under an exclusive with me, and you're going to take this job, and we'll go from there. We'll go from there. And at that point, it was, you know, what is it from Planet of the Apes? It was a madhouse, but it was a great madhouse. And I never worked as hard, never learned as much, and never had as much fun as that 3-year period. I got to know all of you guys really well. I got to have a front row seat, like I said, and see it all happening. I got to be around what I think were frankly superior people to me. So I didn't go in there thinking I was going to change the world. They gave me a chance to be on the 27 Yankees, you know?
Yeah.
And that I just saw myself as a 6th or 7th hitter in that. And I was happy to be there. And I didn't rock a boat. The things I asked for would be, I remember asking to do Mr. Freeze, and Denny didn't like Mr. Freeze. And I had, just give me, Doug said, he's going to say no. I said, okay. So
Denny hates Mr. Freeze.
He hates Mr. Freeze. And so I didn't know, again, I didn't know any of that. So Doug says, I'll do that with you, but you have to make the call. So I called Denny, and he whittled me down from 3 to 1. He said, never ask. This is your yearly allotment of asking me for anything. If I don't like the script Doug turns in, it's a no. And I said, fair enough, all fair enough. And he says, and you can't, you know, you just can't ask anything for a year. And I go, fair enough. I don't know why I went to the wall on that, because it wasn't like, it's just, I had this image, this idea of Mr. Freeze, and it just stuck with me, and it just wouldn't go away. And this fear of being frozen or cold or whatever stuck, you know. You live in Buffalo, but I'm in California, and it's a cold day when it's 70, you know. So he let it happen, and it turned out to be a very big success, and it changed how they did that film. They went from Patrick Stewart to Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm not saying for the better. I'm just saying that one issue changed their idea from the Bruce Timm design to my design. All this stuff happened at a high level, and they reintroduced Mr. Freeze back into the Rogues Gallery after that. And to my word, I never asked for Denny again, and I never say I told you so, and I never ran up the flagpole as a great victor. I just said thank you very much.
Yeah. Mr. Freeze got brought back for the animated series after he got killed. It's Chuck killed him.
Yeah.
And then Chuck brought him back. Or I'm not sure if Chuck killed him or if somebody else killed him, but they had to bring him back because they wanted to use him in the cartoon show, and it burned Denny like, oh,
it
finally rid of this guy.
And what was great was all this stuff was before my time. I used to go, I went to these Batman summits, and I kept my mouth shut. You know, I just sat there and listened, and occasionally they would ask what whatever. And, but I really didn't say too much, because I had this idea of what I was. I knew I wasn't in that position, and I wasn't in a group that I felt I was just lucky I got there. So I always felt very lucky, and always felt like, okay, this issue will be the last issue, and then they're going to realize their mistake.
Were you at the summit in Mohonk?
Yep. Yeah. In fact, that was my shining situation. Everybody was in the right. There were 2 wings of that place, and they were remodeling it then. So everybody, I was a late comer to it, and everybody went to the right side where they had light and power and heat and human beings. I went to the left side, and there was like, I don't know how many rooms were in that place, like 400 or 500 rooms.
Oh, it's huge. It's gigantic.
Well, you go to the direction I went, there was nobody in the left wing, 0. And I was all by myself. And it was, if you remember, it was a funky place. You went up and down and all this stuff. And there was no television, no radio, no nothing, because it was an isolation place. Remember, it's isolation. Because we were with all these 60s guys, right? They were all into the isolation. And So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, I'm in the Overlook Hotel, and I'm sitting.
That's what it reminded me of. Yeah.
It was dark. It was quiet. You'd look down the halls. It was pitch black. They told me when I went there, there's no room service because it's too far for the people to go. It was as creepy as I could get because the wind was just howling that one night, and then it got foggy the next day.
My favorite memory from that place is it's a Denny story. I'm not sure if you were out in that back patio when the package got delivered to him from Frank Miller.
Yeah.
He got the script, which he had asked to be amended for the Batman Spawn team up that he was doing with. And then he opens it up, and we're all sitting around chit-chatting and you're watching Denny read this thing, and his head started to explode. And then he looks up and he goes, "That motherfucker." It was so mad.
Well, they, unfortunately, Denny was his mentor, and they broke,
Yeah, and if you've read that book, I mean, Frank just kind of really screwed Batman in that series. He just went off all of Denny's rails.
Yeah.
He had him throwing batarangs in an attempt to kill people. You
never did that.
No, I mean, it was like.
And it sounds foolish, but those are the good boundaries. I'm a guy who doesn't like boundaries, but that's the good boundaries. You have to work. It's almost like your thing about limiting someone's budget and force them to be creative. There's these boundaries. That's who this guy is. So for my take on it was, well, I know he can't do batarangs in your neck and stuff. So I went from that to, well, how is he going to be seen at night and in a room with you before you know he's in the room with you? So it's not going to be his physicality. It's not going to be his doodads. It's going to be he's a shape, because he's there for us normal people more than even the rogues gallery. The rogues are crazy. That's why they keep doing it again and dealing with him. But they know his boundaries. He won't put a batarang in their neck. But for the rest of us, his is, don't ever do that again. I'm watching you. Even if you're a jaywalker, don't do it again. But he's in that room and he's a shape. So you're not really focusing on all that. He's just this imposing, terrifying silhouette. And that's how I worked with it. And that was fine with Denny. Because, Denny would say things to me like, okay, Doug has some scenes here where there's the Batmobile, no traffic jams in Gotham for him. Just draw him going through. Because it's, how do you get through New York? And I said, no, that's fine. Okay, I didn't even think of that, but that's a good one. He had thought about these things.
Yeah. It's funny because I pitched the idea of Batman having a hydrofoil so that when he did hit a traffic jam, he could just go up above the cars. And if the bridge was backed up, or if the bridge was a drawbridge, he could just go right down to the harbor.
Yeah, I love that.
Right across the river.
I would want to draw that. That's good.
Yeah. I did. I actually did. I put it in a story I had written for Eduardo Barreto, and then it ended up the project got canceled. So then I saved it, and I actually used the hydrofoil in Bane Conquest.
Oh, see, we do that. I had the most I had thought about it was that he went from this really big thing that everyone had, and I figured, well, no. A Formula One type racer from the 30s, because it's small. He can get up in the nooks, he can go down an alley or get on the sidewalk or something smaller, and still have that 30s look. So it would be cool in the sense, have an Art Deco-y feel, or around, that classic design thing. It's funny how we all think how, at that point we got to do the nuts and bolts. And I remember thinking I had put something in that we didn't get around. It's funny to your Bane thing. When I did Kings of Fear, I had wanted to do a story explaining, the story could be the story, but I wanted within it explaining that the bat signal was not a call to him to come and help. It was a warning that Batman was loose, because us regular people wouldn't know what that is, right? We would just say, oh my God, he's loose. He's one of them. He's like the Joker or the Scarecrow or Two-Face. He's one of those guys. And they're having a turf war or whatever. And Batman's clearly the worst because he never goes to Arkham. He's never captured, right? That's how I would think regular people would look at it. So I said, can we put something in there where that's how regular people see it? And they get off the streets when they see that coming. They do it. So you don't want to pull it too much. It'll affect the economy or something, you know, but it was just a warning that he's the worst of them, not that he's a hero coming to save, because it worked differently for me. And they liked that idea. And it just never, there was never a place where we could put that in, you know, the density of a story. It's a good idea, but it would slow down the story, would break it up or whatever. So you'd have to build around it, and it just never happened. So when I did Kings, I said, okay, that's got to be in there somewhere where it doesn't break the flow, but it's a part of it. And I think what we have to do is learn at the time, in the present, when we're dealing with it, to reject a bad idea when it comes along. Have the at least courage to reject it. The first 6 years of my career, I didn't have that ability. Maybe because I was a newbie, I don't know, but I just didn't have the ability. So I would try to do what I could with it, and you get no style points for that. A reader doesn't care. If it sucks, it sucks. Or if the idea comes off badly, whatever, it just doesn't work. Fair enough. That's the rules. So if you're going to have your chance, you have to do it at the time. And you have to go in and just do it. Not being a jerk, not being a prima donna, but you have to argue for your point, and you have to make it clear. And that's just the way it works. I mean, because you're working with a lot of different people, and they're very passionate.
Right. You can't die on every hill, but you have to pick and choose your battles, and you have to fight for them. You know, if you believe in the idea, or if you're working as a team on a project, then you're all there to make that thing the best that it can be. Yes. And if your idea is going to do that and promote that, and maybe expose a flaw, then it behooves you to do it.
Well, and I think it's why Denny weeded me down from 2 or 3 issues to 1 issue. And I, at that time, had the good sense just to take whatever he gave me. And since Doug was writing some one and dones, I'll take it. Doug was shocked by it, but I had done Denny, you know, when I think I'd kind of done Denny a favor unknowingly, because Doug wanted to use Swamp Thing in an issue. And there was this thing where the Vertigo-y monsteries weren't allowed to mix with the DCU stuff then. And Denny had said, well, I don't think we're going to get the rights or get the permission from Karen on that, Doug. So, you know, too bad. But he put it through anyway. And because I'd worked with Karen so much, she said, yeah, is Kelley doing it? Yeah, that's fine. So Doug had always felt, well, you know, we got to do Swamp Thing. And so that was a payback. That's what he thought it was. And that's probably what it was. You know, I didn't know that any of that was going on. I only found that out like a year later, that there was this, and that was from other writers saying, how did you get that? And I said, I get what? And then they told me about that division of those characters.
It's so funny how there are these editorial camps, and they're like little fiefdoms sometimes, where they hold on to these things. Chuck and I, for the longest time, tried to work in the Creeper into Gotham City, into Detective Comics, because we wanted to do a spin-off series about the Creeper. And towards the end of our run there, if you look in the background stuff, you'll see Jack Ryder TV ads, you know, up on billboards and stuff, you know, announcing, you know, that Jack Ryder's, you know, show was being broadcast in Gotham City and stuff like that. You know, I'd put like the Creeper's shadow on a wall in the background or something like that, you know, because we were laying all these Easter eggs, you know, about this series we wanted to do. And it just didn't time out right. It was right around where DC started to implode, and editors were being let go, and you know, and then our time was short at that point too, and you know, then we got jettisoned.
Well, you know, it's funny that 3 times I've come up right to the point to where they're going to say yes. I had put forward a Deadman story idea, and at the first it was through Vertigo then, and everyone loved it. To your point, the editor gets jettisoned. So it's gone, right? Then a few years later, an editor. I'm doing Batman for him, and he says, "You got anything you'd like to do?" And I said, "This Dead Man thing. I'll send it to you if you like it. That's what I would like." It turns out he loved it. He calls me one day, say he's resigned. He got hired by Disney to go do Disney. So it was gone. And then it happened again. Just last year, they had approved, got to that point, and they let go of the editor, and I think someone, the assistant too. So the whole thing was cleared out, and it's like I've killed 3 different editors, I think, with it. So I've found that I won't, you know, that's the thing. That's the next thing that I go, well, if there's someone I don't like, maybe I should just have him pitch Dead Man for me.
And speaking of next thing, Dr. Mass says, cover for your next project by Kelley.
Hey.
Well, the next project after Alien Alamo is The Ghosts of Matacumba Key.
There you go.
And it's a ghost story, and I have every intention of hitting you up for a cover for that.
I would, of course I would. You could say you were doing Casper the Friendly Ghost, I would do it. So don't worry. I loved the one. The one Butch Geist did for you was spectacular.
Yeah, Butch did a great job. That's really cool.
He's terrific, and that's an unsung hero of comic books to me too. Yeah. I owe Butch a lot because he's the one who got me into Marvel as an inker. 82, I think.
Trying to get Butch on this show too.
Yeah, he's a great. You know, he knows. He'd be fascinating because he's done so much. But he's the guy who brought me in. I had been initially, they liked what I had done, but they didn't have anything for me. And Butch had seen it, and he wasn't happy with the inking he was getting, and he was such a good inker on himself, but he didn't have time. So I owe him so much because he was doing Micronauts, and they were 32-page stories, I think. Then they were like it was a bi-monthly, but it was huge.
Okay.
And he gave me the gig based on a poster I'd inked that he liked. And God bless his heart, the first 10 pages, I blew. I just was so bad. I was like frozen. And he called and said, yeah, look, it could be a lot better, but I know what you're going through. Because when I first came there, I was like this too. Next 10 pages come in. He calls me up. Says, Kelley, these are like 50% better. You're getting it. The last 10, he goes, I could not do better myself. We're fine. Do not worry about it. I got you. You're okay. And he nursemaided me through that whole thing. And at that point, it was as much fun as I've had inking his work. I learned a lot looking at his stuff because it was all there. I always feel he really was of the vein of a Kirby or a Byrne. He had so much imagination on these things, and it came out effortlessly. And it was wonder upon wonder just looking at these pages. I still have every single one of my allotment. They were so interesting. I could never give them up. I would always look at them, and I still do.
Butch is a student of cartooning too. I mean, his collections of clipped Sunday pages by artists, everything from Kniff to Friday Foster art. He's got a great knowledge of that, and I'm really excited about tapping into that and talking about the history of cartooning and newspaper strips and stuff like that.
Well, he's
hey Cecil, thanks for the $10 super chat, brother. Great stream, guys. I'm in Batman heaven. Thanks for doing this. All right, thank you, Cecil.
No, he's the man. I mean, I felt that way then, and that's something that not enough people know who he is and what he meant, in my opinion. Everything he touched was wonderful.
There's so many guys in our business that are so underappreciated because they're not maybe flashy, or they're not the latest flash in the pan stylistically. You know, I can't believe that Garcia Lopez's stuff doesn't just fly off shelves. You know,
I feel the same way about Jerry Ordway.
Yeah, Jerry Ordway, Alex Toth. You know,
yeah. In fact, you say that and you get a shrug from people.
Yeah.
With Alex Toth, I'm always surprised at that shrug. Like,
yeah,
I will not name names, but I've been with some pretty good people who don't get it. They just don't see what all that love is about. And you know, hey, everyone's it is subjective. But I'm you know, I'm always kind of chagrined at that. I mean, I came in from not a knowledgeable end, but I look at it and I can see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, you know, all those guys are so great at immersing you in the story, but they're not flashing you with the extra doodads and details, perhaps, that some fans like to see. You know, the every little crack on a brick, that kind of nonsense. You know, they're putting the important stuff in. And
I agree.
Leading you into the story.
I totally agree. And I think that certainly put in as much as you can if you can make your deadline. Because I know that's hackneyed to say, but a lot of the problems with the industry is people can't make deadlines. I think it's a fundamental thing. It's not that they just can't. Photoshop hasn't speeded them up. Scanning and sending your artwork in the day they're going to send it to print doesn't help speed it up.
You know what slowed them down? Photo reference.
Yes.
They're not drawing. They're not cartooning. So they're building things in 3D models, importing it in, and then tracing it, or they're dropping it in, and so that it looks perfect on every angle.
Before I understood it, Graham, I was ready to quit because I remember looking at backgrounds that I couldn't do, and then somebody had told me, I think it was an editor, had said, "Well, they're just photoshopping it, laying it in, darkening it up, add a few things here or there, but they're not drawing it." And I went, "No way, you can't do that." Because I was still doing it like 95% of what I do is out of my head, and what I don't know, you can look up. If it's an F14, you got to look it up. But the rest of it, I just make up as I go. And there's a pleasure in that. I like relying on that. I like thinking, you know, it's like you're a receiver waiting to catch that ball. I better catch that ball.
I mean, I love referencing stuff. Like you said, if I have to draw an F-14, great. I get a picture of an F-14, but then let's say I'm drawing it in some kind of dogfight and I want to exaggerate that F-14. Well, you can't just drop in a photograph of it and trace it. You have to draw it and then move it and push the drawing, maybe elongate it or bend it as it's making a turn, which it wouldn't do. But that's part of it.
I will clearly say it's not due to nostalgia that I feel the earlier guys were awesome and still inspirational to me. It's because they were great. And it was because their minds were so good. And
they could draw the shit out of stuff.
They put us in our place and you know, so and I look at that and I think, well, it's not out of nostalgia. It's not that I grew up with it. It isn't that. I had a very good friend of mine who'd done comics for a long time in a more administrative way, wanted to get back into regular comics and just produce again, be a freelancer. And he says, "Do you have any advice for me?" And I said, "The only advice I have really that I think matters is when you're working, compete with the time that inspired you, not what's going on now.
Right.
The time that knocked you out is what you have to compete with." And I would say it's harder to compete with the guys from that period than it is now because of what you just said. It's out of their imaginations.
Right.
And that is the thing that I still do. I'll look at something and I'll think, I still haven't done what Wally Wood could do. You know, I don't
even try on that case.
No, and I never will. But if there's a guy who taught me how to ink, it was it was Wally Wood.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would tell anyone, if you want to learn to ink, you look at Wally's stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all there. He will teach you texture. He'll teach you line width, weighting, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Every single tool usage, you'll begin to know how he's doing it.
Shadow and black placement.
And the dude was cranking it out.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Moondoggy, thank you for the super chat. Graham, I loved your Batman, but Kelley, you put the fear and spookiness back in Batman with your horror-like style.
Yeah, well, it was
nice.
You didn't have a choice. I couldn't compete with everybody. So you have to find, you know what? That's the thing. You find something, because you could be a weak sister to something, or you can just do your own thing and fail on your own. And that's how I always looked at it. You know, I never go into it, Graham, thinking I'm going to conquer. It's like, well, when they fire me, they're going to know I tried at least to do something on my own.
Right.
And that's all anyone can do, I think.
Jasper Plan 9, Dennis Cowan is one of my favorites. Graham needs to invite him on. I have. I've reached out to Dennis. He's really busy, relaunching his line. Is it the Icon line? I think it is.
Milestone.
Milestone.
Yeah,
maybe
Icon. I can't remember.
So he's been really busy, but I have reached out. He said he wanted to come on the show, but we haven't been able to lock down a date with him. But hoping to get him on at some point. Yeah.
No, like I said, there's a lot of what, and granted, if you're looking at stuff by someone who's taking 4 months to draw an issue, that's going to hamper you having a career unless you can come in there and just take over the world with each book. That's hard to do. And so you have to make the decision, comic book artist or illustrator. And it's one or the other. You can use elements of some into another, and I'm guilty of that. There's great illustrators that have a trick or some kind of thing I like that I'll use here or there because it's a time-consuming thing. And I'm talking about rendering tricks and things like that. But overall, you can, if you're going to want to put every crack in every brick, you can't rely on referencing. You got to do it. You got to use that time by just drawing. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I was at the Kubert School, a student brought a piece by a professional. He just bought this comic and he was really proud of it. And he just loved this stuff. And I won't say who it was, but it, had a lot of detail in it. And he showed it to Joe, and he says, "What do you think of this, Joe? This is amazing, isn't it?" And Joe looked at it and goes, "Well, he's patient."
Yeah. Because you can miss the forest for the trees.
Right. I mean, it's like what Roy Crane told Alex Toth when he was a young man. Take everything that doesn't tell the story and throw it out, and what's left, draw the hell out of it.
Yeah. Bernie Wrightson had told me that everyone assumed he did a lot more than he did. And he says, because he put in so many inks, he'd ink so much. His pencils are beautiful, but there's huge areas that are left for him to do with the brush. And that's where he'd make up his time. And he gave the illusion of a lot more detail, he told me, because of that.
Except on Frankenstein, because that was all detail.
Frankenstein was for himself.
Yeah.
Right? He did it for himself. He'd go do a paying job, come back and spend a week on one of those. He had no idea where it was going, but he had to get it out of his system. That I admire.
Yeah.
I see right now J.G. Jones is doing wonderful Lord of the Rings illustrations.
Oh, yeah?
They're for himself. I find them absolutely. If somebody with brains would get them and do those calendars like they did the Hildebrandt brothers with what he's doing. But they're from love. And once you know that, they're even more exciting to look at, because we get seduced by only doing it for money, for a job, for whatever. And sometimes we forget that's not the thing is the idea. And if the idea works in a book, fine. If it doesn't, still do it. And there's something so powerful of a good idea. They're hard to get, but a good idea will make more good ideas. And it will just go into many different directions. And my whole career is one idea leads to another. And it wasn't anything more than that. I think that's what the inspiration and the excitement of an artist in his work, when you see that happen, you don't have to, no one has to be told. We're all riveted by it. To me, I have found my mistakes had to be utilized because I didn't have time to go back and fix them. The big weird cape was it was a layout I was doing. I got the figure wrong. I had to rework the figure, and I was getting later and later and later. And I fell back on the old artist thing of like, well, it's comics, right? I have to get to the next thing. And both Denny and Doug got a hold of me and said, hey, that last batch, this is really cool. Why did you do that? And I didn't want to say I made a mistake. I said, well, you know, and he makes this image and it's just, and it's stretchable and and they go, that's just really good. That's really cool. Yeah. It's the old lie because the truth is going to get you fired. But I remember liking it when I did it, and the fact they saw it, and the fact I didn't have time to correct it, and I had to work with it.
Where'd the ears thing come from? Where did the really tall ears come from?
It came from me knowing that I didn't. Okay, when you approach Batman, you know, you're thinking how, like the Batmobile, how will these things work? And I'm not able to do that because I don't know how I would be. I know what it's like to be afraid of something, though. So when I was doing it, I wasn't thinking how would it work, how would it function, any of those things. I was thinking, what would that look like in an alley or in a dark room or in any place where the lighting isn't good? There would be this, to me, pretty frightening image of this guy, of this figure. I don't know what it is. And I took it as the reader may know, but the occupants of this fictional world don't know. So I have to play it that way. And I thought that would frighten me. This weird, it doesn't make human sense, but it's there. Is it a human or is it a what the hell is it? Right. And that was the thing, was the cape then became a thing. That his anatomy became less important to me showing it as the cape did, because that's the fear thing, was the unseen winds or whatever. It took a life of its own. It worked only because I think it was different. Now, there were other artists who'd done it. I worship Marshall Rogers. He had long ears.
Yeah. Bernie did it too.
And Wrightson's one shot at it was. But when I did it, I wasn't thinking so much of them, oddly enough. I wasn't really thinking of them. Well,
I always thought you thought of Bernie Wrightson when you first approached Batman.
I think what happened was I had a lot of his shtick, the way he would use a brush. Later on, I found I was using it the same way he was. Pulling here, pushing there. It's almost at the same places. The love of lighting, the inability to do action. You have to find a way. I can compose. I think I'm pretty good at composition, but I'm not really good at action. So if I can make that composition look like action, that's where that would come from. So I just started to do more of that. And then it's the old Wally Wood thing. When you're done, add more ink, more ink, more ink, more ink. And so all these things kind of came together. I purposely, for the time I was on Batman, I didn't look at guys that, that might, here I say, compete in those times. Well, these guys so intimidated me, I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't look at Marshall. I couldn't look at Wrightson. I couldn't look at Walt Simonson without going, well, I can't be as good as them, so why try? I mean, that's what goes through your head. I just can't do it. And so when I didn't look at it and I just stuck to the story and stuck to the day, stuck to the page, stuck to my steering star was don't be bored. If I'm bored, they'll be bored.
Mm-hmm.
So don't do something boring. And if you don't know what to do, dump realistic, go imagination. Because realistic is great, but imagination is interesting.
Mm-hmm. Cartoon it.
Yep. And I'm going to err on interesting. And even if someone gets upset or doesn't like it or disagrees or asks how it's done, that is totally okay.
Were you a fan of Don Newton's art?
Yeah, very much.
Yeah. Don Newton was my the guy that I think probably influenced my Batman and certainly my Phantom work. When I illustrated the Phantom for King Features, Don Newton was the guy that inspired me. But also for Batman, it was Newton, Aparo, and Dick Sprang.
Yeah. Okay. All great.
Yeah.
All great. All people I could never be in a million years. I mean, I would look at it and I go, probably the closest to Sprang because I would do weird stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But Don Newton died way too young, had far more to do.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Was a genius.
Great anatomist.
I think yes, and knew how to do it to where it didn't overwhelm his work.
Mm-hmm.
Much like Frazetta, great anatomist, but knew how to use it to where it didn't clutter you up.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim Aparo.
Those panels that I used to do with Batman, where he'd hold the cape like Dracula, and then I'd have the scallops and stuff coming towards the reader. Got that from Newton. Newton used to do that, and it looks so great. The folds, and he'd have the shadows on the folds, and I was like, oh my god, I got to do that.
Yeah.
People think that I was the one who did that.
No, I would always say that it also works really good in my memory because I would always think of Marshall, who was kind of stiff in a lot of ways.
Yes.
But his design sense was so phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And his Batman, he had a great trick because he's the guy who got me to do this in just my one meeting with him. And not so much Batman, but to just do comics in general. And he had said this fascinating thing about when he drew Batman or in Detective, that he would draw Bruce, he'd say however tall he was. And he says, but when he was Batman, I added 1 head height to him. And he said it made him more imposing. And it was just this subliminal thing he had done.
Interesting.
When he was doing the cape, probably a lot of it came from that. He used it always as the first thing you'd really think of with Batman. And a lot of guys do that. A lot of guys say it, but he made it, probably because he was such a Will Eisner guy, he made it be part of the flow of the character. And he was such a design genius that all of his panels compositionally were designed with the word balloons in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So he would always have it direct that way. And so he would have to filch on the character to make that work. So you would read in the order it was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. None of that I really knew. He just said a few things that stuck with me. I couldn't look at his work while I did it. A lot of guys I couldn't look at. Yeah. It was just too intimidating because, for us, we worked on a character that had been around at that time 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody that had done it that we knew was great had really made their names doing that, really had made their mark. And here we are handling this, and then Nightfall happens, and now everybody's looking.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't just become this issue of Batman this month. It's that storyline's in the news.
Yeah. It's selling,
so we all had everyone had to crank it up that notch. And the 90s was a really impressive time for Batman.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the Wild West for me at a time when that character was at a real apex. More so than now. Much more so than now. We relied on the very nature of that character, not these other things, just who he was. And that's due to Denny saying you had to be this way.
Right.
But boy, under Denny, you had a wide range of styles. You had a wide range of stories. Alan was different from Doug, was different from Chuck, and they all worked together and made something great. I don't know. It's like
Alan was great. And the work before Nightfall that he and Norm did.
Yeah.
Was really outstanding. They introduced some really interesting villains that had never been done before. Crazy stories. I mean, Alan was a really, really good storyteller.
Yes, he was. He was, and a guy who, upon rereading, is absolutely fascinating and original. And it's like a Beatles tune. If you never heard it before with Alan and it came out right now, it would be fine.
It's still got Batman too.
Yep. He did.
The character.
He did. He really did. His approach was fabulous. And again, a guy who, when you know Alan, you go, Alan's not like, he doesn't project like that.
No, he's so humble.
He's such a humble 60s Scotsman.
Yeah.
Very delightful. I had so much fun. I love Alan. And I would always say to Alan, you're not even like I don't even see any of that. Your opinions or anything. They're absolutely opposite of Batman. And he says, well, I'm a professional writer. And I went, you're it.
We need more of that.
Yeah, I'm a professional writer. And I went, I'm sorry, you're right. But
thank you, Gabriel F. Appreciate the super chat, brother.
So it's a thing that for me, I am very lucky that I didn't go into that thinking I was something. So I had my ears open and listened, and my eyes open and I could see. And at that point, you can soak in so much. And like I said, I looked at everybody then, and I just was. I remember even Batman Adventures. Kelly Puckett was doing such a good job writing those with Mike Paraback, another fellow who's left us too soon.
Yeah, Paraback. I loved his Justice Society book that came out. It was so much fun, and it was just really great. And he died too young. And Ringo was another one.
Yeah,
Mike Waringo.
Yeah, what a stable we were in, huh? And I looked at that then at these guys, all very different people in their approaches. That office was fine with it.
Yeah.
Very encouraging to everyone just doing their own thing. And you got to remember, the power of what was going on at Image at that time was dominating all the rest of comics, except our little world, it didn't. We were just still doing what we did. And we were the Rivendell of in editorial sense. The world is all this, and there was us. Yeah. And what happened? We survived it, and that went away. And that period of comics now is considered. I give all the people, but Denny steered the course, and could see a big picture, and didn't let us all fret. I mean, I remember Denny just saying, "Everybody, don't worry, we'll sell the book. You just do what you do. We'll sell the books."
Yeah, they didn't look for a house style because everybody on every book, and then you on the covers, had a completely different style.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Every one of them had a very different style. And it all worked. They didn't care. They just wanted good stories, good storytelling.
Yep.
It was a great time. Politics didn't matter. You got jobs on merit.
Yeah, it really was that. And you got major points for being on time.
Oh yeah.
That was huge. Yeah. I took a great comfort in the fact that I was on time for 3 years in a row. 36 for 36 on time.
Yep.
And I did, as Doug Wildey had said, I did learn how to draw. When I was done with that, and by that I mean idea to paper was effortless, where it used to be a struggle, and you know, I was Yosemite Sam in those old days when I'm drawing and then you erase and draw. After that, you know, I used an eraser to clean up after I inked, if I did.
Well, that brings up a mention here. Somebody said throw the eraser away. He was referring to, I had JRJR on a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And he talked about how Kirby had told Buscema, who had told Romita Jr., to, if you're not doing X amount of pages a day, throw out your eraser. But he said, throw out your fucking eraser. That's what John Buscema said.
Oh, look, when I first came on to Batman, it was 95. And I'd done like 3 or 4 issues, and the DCs in those days were very closely linked to the European publishers. And I think it was Pantini. Is that the name of the?
Panini.
Panini. Yeah, Panini.
Yeah, they're a German publisher, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. It's so anyway, they were handling the stuff in Italy. So they'd asked if I would go to their book fair and help promote this, whatever, because Batman was going to start coming out in these volumes there. And I was like going, well, you know, that's all the way around the world. I'm on a monthly book. You're talking a week. I'm going to have to deal with jet lag, come back and try to catch up. So I got a little bit ahead. I went, and I felt okay. But what sold it was that I was going to have a day from 8 till 5 where I would sit in this special room signing next to John Buscema. So it was worth it.
That's jet lag. I'll take that to sit next to.
I will take that. All the trouble. And they were going to throw in that they were going to take me and let me walk around the Vatican for a day, which I said, okay. I said, okay, I will. There's 2 things there. I wanted to see Sistine Chapel. I had to see that. If I'm going to be, if you're going to be within literally a stone's throw, I want to see that.
Oh, absolutely.
Said, yeah. So, but I sat next to John, which is right there with seeing Michelangelo. And John was as wonderful a person, not just with fans, but when people would bring up art to show him. So I'm sitting there and someone would ask for a thing, and they were asking John to do a little thing. Everything was the same with John. Captain America head, Thor head, whatever. And then he would just change it to be whatever. But it's the same thing all over and over. Here I am laboring on these things. And he said, he leaned over at one point. My wife fell in love with him because he was so practical, you know. And she's sitting there too. And he leans over and he says, young man, that's very good, but you're working way too damn hard.
Yeah.
And I said, and I turn right around and I say, because you're John Buscema, who was given the gift from God, and I am sweating it out. And he looks at me and he says, you know, there's no difference between us in that I just hide my sweat. And so I go, okay.
Words of iron from the master.
Yes. And he was wonderful. And we spent that day talking about it. He was telling me about when he did his advertising work. What is it, the beer you had back there? Rheingold or Rhine?
Oh, something? Rheingold? Yeah.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. His friendship with Frazetta. You know, which was fascinating. He told me how he worked. And he says, well, first he said, how do I work? And I said, well, I get the script and I'm trying to get it done. And I try to make it done. You know, I'm like we do. And I said, well, how do you do it? And he says, I tell Marvel to have the damn thing to me it has to be to me on the last day of the month so I can read it. And then I tell my wife coffee and sandwiches for 8 days. And I just get it done. you know, 3 pages a day, whatever the story is.
Mm-hmm.
After that, he says, the other 20 days are mine. I don't do any drawing. And I tell my wife, wherever we're going to go and do whatever you want. You get 3 weeks out of the month. Marvel gets 1.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's how he did it.
Well, it's a great gig if you can get it and make it happen. I can tell you that.
He worked until he died where Marvel wouldn't let him go anywhere.
Yeah.
Remember? They had him signed and I mean,
although his last job was at DC.
Yeah, because at that point the world was changing. What the hell? And he was getting older.
Yeah.
But when he first came over, he said he made this outlandish offer, or Stan had wanted him, and he just made this. You can't afford me, and I wouldn't go back to that. I'd done it. I'm making all this what I'm doing. And Stan said 100. And this is back in whenever he came over, 68, 69, right around there. He says $100,000 a year, guaranteed, if you just work for us. What do you want to do? And so he did, obviously, the Avengers. He did tons. I did not realize. My wife's really gotten... Surfer? Yeah, Silver Surfer, Thor. My wife has really gotten into... She never cared about comics. I'm doing them for years. She could care less, right? Which is nice in its own sense, because you don't talk about this all the time. But in the last year and a half, she's become enamored with comics. And it started with a little superhero stuff. She liked Doctor Strange, the old Ditko, Gene Colan, liked the Defenders because Doctor Strange was in it. So she was doing it the way we do. You follow the character, and then you get to know the artists. Became big fan of Doctor Strange, those really old ones, the classic ones.
Yeah.
She really became fascinated, loved John Byrne's Fantastic Four. I don't know how she came across it, but she was organizing all my books. And I had that run, and she just started reading them. And she really liked John Byrne's work and liked his writing quite a bit. She loved how he handled Sue Richards. And out of the blue, I had a couple of these old romance comics. I think because Win Mortimer drew them. And I had a couple issues of that. And so she was going through it, and she read them, and she was upset with me, like I didn't have all the night nurses, and I didn't have Our Loves. I'd have 1 or 2 because an artist was in it. And I said, I was a boy. You know, it's bad enough I'm reading comics, much less, hey, did Our Love come in? The beatings would never end.
That was an ass kicking.
Yeah. No. So she started getting into it. And I went and bought her there was a big lot of them, and I bought a ton of them for her. I said, okay, that'll fill her with it. And there was, I don't know, a couple hundred of them. And she now has like 7 of these huge bins full of them. Comics come here every day. She's building this collection of stuff I don't have. I was in the Avengers and Captain America and Superman.
Sure.
So she's gotten into this. And what's fascinating is she's now identifying the artists, and she'll say, do you know this guy or that guy? And I said, yeah, I do. I saw how great Vince Colletta's his girl art was, because he was doing tons of these things. I never knew that. So I'm looking at them going, these are great. These are really good. John Romita's stuff. Did you see how beautifully Don Heck would ink John Buscema and vice versa?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it is A-level stuff. I'm looking at this knocked out. I'm looking at all of these guys. It's like you could tell Gene Colan was just killing it on these things. The most beautiful girls, wonderful settings. Roy Thomas's Ghost in a lot of these stories. They're well done. They're a
lot of those guys, they were big fans of Stan Drake.
Yeah,
and Leonard Starr, and these great cartoonists that were in the bigs, as it were. The
Graham, do you also think it was like a mini vacation from having to draw Tomb of Dracula or having to draw Conan? You could do this not lighter fare,
Yeah.
but a different thing where it
Well,
demanded different.
They were doing that before those books.
Yeah.
You know, Conan came afterwards for Buscema, because they were doing that stuff in the very early 70s. And I think to them, it was like none of those guys really cared about superheroes that much.
No, I don't think they did.
But a romance comic, that was just like the Heart of Julia Jones. You know, and I think they got into that because they were looking, you know, like, oh man, I want to try and do this like Stan Drake did or something like that, you know, or Alex Kotsky or, you know, any of those guys.
I agree. Because when I look at it, I see no shortcuts. Right. I see a lot of very imaginative layouts that you don't have, that they wouldn't have time doing, you know, Iron Man, Avengers, or you got to get it. But this, they're taking their time.
Sure, so they're drawing nuances too, you know, of real life things. You know, people like in the coffee houses, you know, the hippies playing the guitars, you know, things like that. They're not making up like Kirby machinery and stuff like that, which I don't think a lot of them really cared about. But hey, Jasper Plan 9, thank you for the super chat. He wants to know what Kelley can say about Red Rain, Bloodstorm, and Crimson Mist. Kelley talked about Red Rain, but what about Bloodstorm?
Well, Bloodstorm and Crimson Mist were never in the plans. It was, you know, the success of one thing leads to another thing. So Red Rain, I thought we'd done it, said everything that could be said. It's a gothic story the way it ends, you know. So you figure that's it, you know. And as I was saying earlier, where I couldn't see Doug's idea on the phone until I read his treatment, I couldn't see it. I couldn't see that being a successful franchise in the least, or successful in the sense that it's still around to this day. It's still within canon for them for doing more things with Vampire Batman. So when they had said Bloodstorm, I again was saying, well, what can we do? We've done, you know, the problem with a sequel, unless it's Godfather or Bride of Frankenstein or something, is you're just taking the same territory again. And I'm loath to that. I didn't want to do the same thing again. And I told Doug, well, he says, man, they're really coming down on this. I mean, they want this. And it's almost like I felt obligated the way Charlton Heston did. They let me do Planet of the Apes, so I'll be in, you know. All right.
He demanded they kill him.
Yeah. Well, that's why they blew up the world. But in science fiction, that doesn't work. Thank God, because I'm an Apathon fan. I can watch all those movies. So
they're fun.
They are a blast, man. So when it came, Doug then saw that as a challenge, because I had said, look, I know they want that, but it's my hideout there now, and I don't want to get someone else to do it, is what initially I said. You can get someone else to do it. And I said, because I'm going to be the guy who did great on this one and then did this half-assed flop thing here that didn't really have a story, something to say. We'd already seen it. So Doug comes right back at me and he says, so you don't trust that I can come up with something? And I said, no, it's not that. I just don't think you can. It's not that I don't trust you. I just don't see how we do what we've it's Jaws 2. I mean, what are we gonna, you know? I said, we've said and done, and the tragedy and all the stuff that a vampire story is, and all the stuff of Batman, he resists it, you know? And he says, okay. How about this? And this time he did say it on the phone off the top of his head, where he just goes, the Joker's final defeat of Batman is that he gets Batman to cross that line and take blood, and the blood he'll take is from the Joker himself. Knowing, yeah, I'm going to be gone, but I took you out and made you worse. That was my goal. And I went, that's really good. Okay, that's meaty. And Bloodstorm came out, was a bigger hit than Red Rain. You know, absolutely bigger. And then Doug at that point said, look, we have to kill him off now. But the last vestiges of him say, that I'm going to have to trust Gordon and I'm going to have to trust Alfred to do the right thing, even though I'll fight them to the end. But they got to do the right thing after I take out the entire Rogues Gallery. So Gotham will be freed and then freed of me. And I went, okay, I'm in there again. Okay, because that's good. None of that was planned at the beginning. I think it's the great David Lynch line about when he came up with Twin Peaks, there was no Red Room, there was no Bob, there was none of that stuff. It was just this murder mystery in a small town because that's what he knew. And the metaphysical came into it after the fact. The weirdness came in after the fact. All of these great characters came in after the fact. And he had always said one idea spawns two more, those two do four more, and it just is exponential. And not all of them are going to be great, but most of them are going to be great because they're following in that. And that's what happened. It's one of those things that, and I couldn't see it. I mean, I sometimes am upset that I can't see it. And then other times I'm kind of happy because then I enjoy the ride. And it keeps me trusting. Comics are collaborative for the most part. And I've written and drawn my own stuff and I have enjoyed it, but sometimes I'm not sure if I'm going too far, or if I'm telling a joke only I get. So you have to rely on someone you trust to read it and tell you, because it can certainly be done. Jim Steranko, Frank Miller at his height. There's people, you can do it. And there's a great deal of pleasure in that. But for me, I know I go too far. And so I don't, and I'll do that when I'm in the company of others. I can do it because they'll say no, or rein it in, or explain it to me. And that I can do. And I know to this day that even the reputation of my career has not bought me 1 inch more in somebody saying, yeah, okay, because you did this, we'll let you do it. When I start talking, they go, no. No. But what I do get are people wanting to work with me who are seduced by that. And I've had more than my share of editors tell me this, that they saw that what we were doing, it would be out on the stands. One editor had told me that he had kind of dumped comics. He was done with it. There's no more could be done. He saw some freakish cover I had drawn, and he says, they can't be doing that. What is DC putting that on there for? He picked it up, and then he got into the books, and he was back, and then became an editor. Had a couple of editors do that. Another one called me up and said, I was moving. He says, I'm moving from one place to another. And in New York, you know, you're going up and down stairs carrying shit. So he's getting rid of a ton of things. He says, and I was going through and I came to a box that had Batman you had done in it. And so I look at it to decide if what I'm going to do. And he says, I lost a day reading them. And I thought, man, when you first came on, I didn't like it. 2 months, 3 months later, I loved it, what you were doing as a fan. And then I bought the books. And through all my moves, I always kept it. Now I have virtually no books, but I have yours. And I'm carrying them up the stairs. And he says, so I decided I'm going to call you and see if are you interested in doing something? And I always came back and I said, well, yeah, if I have someone running interference, I need that tight end to block for me when we're going around the end, because I know what's going to happen. And I said, because they would always ask me how this would happen. The last San Diego was talking to one of these editors, and artist after artist after artist who was doing it, once they knew, because I do so few shows. One every few years, 5, 6 years sometimes. The one we did in Dallas, I hadn't done one in God knows how long, 10 years. And I took it because Bernie's on one side and you're on the other. And it was like, okay, I feel safe. I feel safe. And you buffered me from Simon and
Oh
Bisley.
yeah, that's right.
So if I had that, okay, I can come back and try something. But they always asked me that, and I said all these artists would come up to me when the editor said that, because they didn't know what I looked like or anything, and they all had to do this thing, and it's very intimidating and very humbling, because they all say you opened the door to a way of thinking, or allowed me to think that you can do more and whatnot, and I had no idea, because I'm not socially media guy. I don't go to shows. I tend to think the worst of myself, and I tend to think I see all the things I can't do. And but all that's overridden by this sheer excitement of these ideas that at the time they're infecting me, I'm fine, I'm immune. I get it done, I turn it in, obviously it goes away. And I'm left with that empty thing until the next idea comes. And I'm not a guy who goes back and massages my career or massage what I do or my style. I tend to just say, it's out there. It's not mine anymore. Once you pick up a book, it's theirs. Actually, more than mine. It's theirs. They're the ones doing it. I'm getting paid to do it. They're having to shell out their hard-earned bucks for it.
Right. Yeah.
So
we talked about movies and the differences, and that's the point I wanted to make about comics, and what makes it such a wonderful medium is that it's participatory. You know, everything on a movie screen is given there to you, but in a comic, you have to participate. You have to fill in the blanks in between those panels. Those gutters in a panel are time, and you have control of that time. And you know, you fill in where the artist might have left something a little bit oblique, you know, and you're filling in that detail in your mind, you know, and I think that's why it's such a great art form, and why it's so immersive when you're incorporating
that's when these ideas come. I always think how it will be in our medium. And I found that what my style did was the things that other people found dull, I found enthralling and interesting and fascinating. And it would be things as simple as a scene where Batman's walking down the street and the writer apologizing, I know this is kind of dull, but he's walking, there's a reason, and he's thinking whatever. And I love that, because I went, well, what if I did the shot, and it's really disconcerting, discordant, I guess is better, that as he's walking down the street, we shoot it from a sewer, and the sewer grate, and he's in that, and it's like he's trapped by this, and it says backwards, it says City of Gotham, and then the light coming down makes it say City of Gotham going down a sewer. It was one little thing. That idea was so exciting and so thrilling, and it was more fun than when he's punching guys to me.
Sure. Little Eisner-esque.
It could have been a cover.
Yeah.
And it was just, yeah, it's one of these odd things. I remember another one where it was written as such, I think it was Steve Niles, and he says, well, he's in the Batmobile, but I don't want a regular old Batmobile. He has all these Batmobiles, so I want something totally different as a Batmobile. Okay, and I sat there and I thought, well, the Batmobile's got to be the Batmobile. I don't know how to do that, because I'm not a car artist in that sense. I can do them, but it's not my first love.
Right.
Then it just hit me the day I sat down to do it. I said, okay, I'm going to trust myself. I'm not going to think about it now like I do other things and chew it over. I'm going to wear myself out, because this isn't my wheelhouse. So I'm just going to let it hit me that day. And I sit down, and as soon as it happened, I go, it's not this dark blue thing. It's chrome. It's pure chrome. And it's riveted. And it's got 3 wheels. 1 in the back, 2 in the front. It has this huge rocket. And that's it. It was weird. It was wonky. And it was so good that the toy people got a hold of DC wanting to, they'd seen this. And they wanted to do that. And DC said, we can't do a chrome Batmobile. And I agree. They can't make a chrome toy because it looks like so different. But it was for me, it was successful only in that it got me through the day and I felt I satisfied my writer.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of it I can't control.
Right, right.
The fact that this Eagle Moss company wanted to make this big ass thing of it, would it have been cool? Certainly. It wouldn't have fit at all. It was like, I've never been one of those guys who go, oh, DC did that. No, I get it. You wouldn't have understood it. It didn't fit into what it was. And I wasn't really asked to do that.
But did they use it in the story?
Yes.
Well, then they should have let Eagle Moss make it, because it's part of the canon, you know, and they make great toys too.
Yes, they do. I think they did one of your Batmobile. They did one of my Batmobile.
Yeah, they did the subway rocket. Yes,
yes. And I was stunned that when they sent it, I thought they'd just make a toy. I didn't see they hired someone to figure out the engineering of it and do a schematic of how it all worked. And I went, hey, that guy should get all the.
Yeah. He has to bring science into it.
Yeah, I had none whatsoever. So at that point, yeah, I mean, I never, you know, I never think that way beyond my day in front of the page.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think of the legacy of it. I don't think what it could be in the future. I don't think of any of that other than, boy, that idea satisfied me. I enjoyed my day. I cheated doing a real job for yet another day. That's a pretty long run, you know, of not having that. So it has fulfilled me that way. When I do something, when it comes to a good storytelling moment, it's usually a shot. It's usually something where I figured out how to take something mundane and make it interesting. And I will lose. I think I've really sometimes make my life a lot harder. There was a story we had where it was a Batman story, and the villain was going to electrocute this guy. He's all, you know, stuck tied down in a chair, electric chair or something. And rather than a switch, Doug wanted it was impromptu, so he was going to plug it in the wall. The bad guy was going to plug it in the wall. And that just seems so prosaic. And I couldn't figure out how to do. Does he kneel down? Does he lean over? Where's the plug at? Mm-hmm. Does the extension cord reach? You know, that kind of stuff. So I thought about it for a long time. And then I finally thought, I'll shoot it from inside the plug. And you'll see the panel will be two, you know, vertical slats that you look through. I won't say what it is. I won't show it before, and I won't show, you know, like that's what's happening. All you'll see is in one little sliver panel, which is the plug and it will be the guy reaching, and the next one will be the plug. You'll see that. Mm-hmm. And it will just be these two slats. And then the next panel, obviously, the guy's electrocuted. And it was odd, and it threw people off. And I remember Jim Ballant, who's doing Catwoman, called me up, and he said, this really threw me for a bit because I didn't know what it was. And then once I realized what it was, I threw the comic book up going, that's so good. And I just had hoped, okay, other people would get that, because it was this thing that I probably, in retrospect, should have just had him plug it in and get on with the day and work on but it made me stop and think, how do I make a Batman comic feel like a Batman comic? And that's generally how it is something different that I wouldn't have done that in a Flash or a Superman, that they wouldn't let me touch. But I mean, I wouldn't do that there. I would follow the rules more so. But with Batman, I always felt, well, I'm allowed to do some of this stuff. So it would sometimes be the shot. It wouldn't even be angle. It would just be this weird shot. Mm-hmm. I never wanted to draw the Batcave the same twice because it was a big labyrinth of a place, and I didn't want to be constrained with something. And so they would ask me, Kelley, what the hell? For example, I started drawing all of these, and this is my backstory in my head that no one cares about. But I drew all of these arches, these bricked arches in the Batcave, because I got tired of drawing stalactites all the time. So I needed some structure, and I wanted to look like there was something there. Now, I didn't think who built it or anything, and Denny did call once. I think it was Denny. I know Doug had questioned me on it quite a bit when they saw it. And so Denny said, what is this? What is this thing here you're doing? And I said, well, in the old days of Bruce's great-grandfather, it's where they smuggled stuff in and out, that they had to, like Civil War times or something like that. They're on the right side of things, and this is where they hid stuff to go do whatever. I don't know. But I said, that's how I see it. It was something that was there a long time ago. They obviously knew of these caverns there. They utilized them for some good purpose. That's all I know. And that's maybe in the Wayne bloodline. His father was this great doctor, and his grandfather, I don't know. Well, lo and behold, later on, they incorporated that into one of those films. And DC had told me that I had done all these designs and stuff and wrote a lot of this stuff, and they used that. And it's just this throwaway little thing because I got bored of drawing stalactites. And I just, and I'd seen Antonio Gaudi's incredible architecture where he would do these incredible brick archways. And rather than just do simple arches to get from one part of the cathedral to the other, he made them really interesting. And they weren't religious. They were just echoing ancient Rome. They were all in the catacombs. That's all it was. And so I went, that's interesting. If there's a backstory, there's your backstory. And then that actually filtered down, or filtered up actually, to how these things enter into a film. Not that legitimizes it or whatever. It just means a good idea can do that. Yeah. So I always look at, I think it's Batman Begins. I always look at that, and it makes me laugh like hell because I remember that day and having to answer to Doug and then to Denny what that all was about. And I love the fact that they would push me to have an answer. If you're going to be different, you better have a reason, and you better argue your point. Gene Wilder having to argue to have the tap dancing scene in Young Frankenstein.
Right. Until
he's screaming at Mel Brooks, and then Mel Brooks goes, okay. You fought for it, so now I know you believe in it. And I didn't get to that point, but it was a lot of times I had to explain why I did things the way I did.
Right.
Just so they knew I wasn't, taking their character and treating him, as long as it was done with respect, they didn't mind.
Right. Well, we're closing in on 3 hours on this thing here.
Wow.
Can you believe it?
Well,
so
old friends will do this.
That's right. We're chit-chat about stuff that we love.
Yes.
Batman, movies, comics.
Our dads.
Our dads. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All that kind of fun stuff. And it's really been great having you on. Is there anything you got going on you want to plug, or?
I'm right now in talks and with DC about doing another Batman thing.
Okay.
But it's got to be, there's certain things I want to do. It's that thing where before I get into it, I want to make sure it's what it is, because it's going to fall outside of its canon, but it's going to kind of fall outside of what they do. Because I don't keep up with all of it, and it's too constraining.
Okay.
So before I say yes to it, I just would like, normally they'll say, here's the gist of it, and you'll go from there. I wanted some stuff done first. I know how that sounds, but I'm too old to get trapped into something I don't like. And
absolutely.
Yeah. And if I'm going to do it, I'm just going to do it the way I do in general. I don't want to, you know, I know how that sounds, and I don't mean it to sound like that, but that's where I flourish. And it's like a director wanting final cut.
Mm-hmm.
I know the idea is very good. It's very different. It's pure Batman, and it's not romance Batman. It's not any of those it's Batman.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, I'm gonna buy it because it
okay,
sounds great already.
Yeah, so that's
I haven't bought anything for DC in 20 years practically.
No, it's I just want that kind of supernatural angle to it. And one of the things I wanted was Deadman as a guest. Deadman being in it a lot.
Right.
Because it has that angle. And the way I like to do Deadman, not heroic Deadman.
Right.
That's going on. And then at this as of we speak, I am involved in a very large project with Matt Wagner right now. And I'm pretty much got that started, and that has been an absolute pleasure to work on. And I can't go further because I don't know how Matt wants to handle all this, but it is pure horror. Absolute pure, undiluted, politically incorrect horror.
Nice. Do you have a publisher for that?
He has. There are people who want to publish it. I don't want to do that. I want to do it. I would prefer to have the freedom right now. There are people who are absolutely wanting this and saying, now, let's do this now. And look, Graham, as soon as they know, they're going to say no, 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 no.
Yeah.
Because the beautiful thing Matt Wagner did was wrote a completely honest piece of work. And it's the way it should be. And it is pure, unadulterated horror.
Well, you guys need to own that and control it.
I think you know, the thing that he and I talk about is he likes the idea of that, but then he says, but Kelley, then we have to put it all together, and I go, we can do that.
Yeah.
I'll do that. I'll get my kids to help me to do it. But I am willing to have that freedom. I'm willing to be in a place where anything can happen, like what I knew in the 90s with DC, where anything could happen. We're not in that place right now. And so my thing is, I have to overcome so much of the impediments we have anymore is I have to create completely wherever that goes, whatever that does, and let that just do its thing. And when I got what he wrote, we talked it over and talked it over and talked it over, and he researched, I researched, I told him what I wanted, we discussed over things, and he gave me this incredible 90-page script. And it grew. It grew. It's going to be 48 and 62. There's no fat in this thing. It just goes from killer scene to killer scene to killer scene, telling this wonderful story. Absolutely wonderful story. And Matt has a literary pulp sense, I always say. Very literary, very pulp at the same time.
Yeah.
He has such a great sensibility of how to make something very low, very high, something very exploitive, very beautiful. And that's a great challenge as an artist.
He writes great Batman too.
Oh boy, doesn't he? I think he's dead on.
Yeah.
And
well, you got a lot of fans here that would support this project. If you read in the comment section, they're you know.
Well, I will. Yeah, I will when it's done.
They're hot for this thing. So
it's I think as original a thing with a traditional character as I've ever seen. And that's what when he first said it to me, I again, like with Doug, I went, oh, okay. And then and then he told me the outline and I went, that's brilliant. I would like that. And whenever you do that, whenever that happens to you, where you go, I would like that. Even if I didn't do it, that's something I'd be interested in. Because one, I had, oh God, here we go again, to that is utterly original. Well, that's the territory. And you have to be free. I mean, if there's a thing about creating, you have to be free. And it doesn't matter. Other people will put their boundaries on something. That's up to them. But for me, I never wanted to know where they were for myself, much less from another crew. Anything I read, movie, book, music, whatever. And let that speak to someone. Just let that experience speak to someone. Not think about anything else other than what I was telling you earlier. That day, I'm not bored. And that day, I'm excited by the idea. I want to only be frustrated that I can't get it on paper, not for any other reason. So,
well, Paradigm is out there now, bud.
Yeah,
you can do it. I'm living the dream right now.
I think
creating my own stuff. I have the freedom. I don't answer to anybody.
Isn't that wonderful?
It is, and I don't have to keep my mouth shut about anything.
No, I'm sitting here enjoying every day. My wife has noticed that.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know it. It's not like I say, hey, I had a great day today. She just says, wow, I haven't seen you like this in a long time.
Exactly.
And I said, well, I'm not second guessing myself. I'm just sitting down going, I'm going to show this, or I'm going to depict this, or this is really nasty. But it's within context of telling a good story. And so it builds the atmosphere. If you're going to exploit, which I'm all for, if you're going to exploit, it's got to mean something. It's got to have a higher power to it. If you see the horrific stuff in A Clockwork Orange, it has to be there to where you get to the full circle of it with the character of Alex. It has to be there. These incredible rape scenes, this incredible violence, this kicking old homeless people. Oh my God, you couldn't do this now. But it's not about that. It's about society and its treatment of these things, and about the individual. It's so amazing. It means more to me now when I watch that movie than even when I was younger. And if you're going to create something like that, you have to be an absolute free to do it. And that's what we have to do. That's our responsibility. If someone's offended, I'm okay with it. They have to control their emotions, though, not me.
Right. You're your story. You tell it your way.
I want them to have an emotion. And I want that what's coming out of me is a pure thing. It's not anything other than I'm horrified by this too. And I'm touched by this too, or I'm enthralled by this too. Whatever the emotion is, I'm doing it too. I'm not a guy who's pulling the strings. I don't work that way. But I am someone who wants to explore those things for myself. And if I can do that honestly, and the only way to do that is through freedom, there you go. Then I have a chance.
Those are words of iron, folks.
Words of iron.
Let's thanks to Kelley Jones for coming on the show tonight, and thanks everybody in the chat for your participation and the super chats. It was really appreciated. Next week we have Adam Kubert on.
Now you have a good guest. Now you have a good guest.
I'll bet we don't go 3 hours.
No.
But yeah, so tune in next week for Adam. And back Alien Alamo if you haven't, and subscribe to this channel. And let's help continue to make great comics, my friends. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye now.